We're about to begin. We are ruled by the television coverage. Live television coverage.
In other words, Ron's time.
He walked out and said, I'm going to the station and turn this on.
Good morning.
Morning.
To the inhabitants of the town of Northampton in Rockingham County, New Hampshire, qualified to vote in town affairs. You are hereby notified to meet for the first deliberative session of the annual town meeting to be held at the Northampton School, 201 Atlantic Avenue, Northampton, New Hampshire, on Saturday, February 3rd at 8:30 a.m. Well, it's 8:35, but we're governed by the television on switch, so we started at 8:35. Now, we have a few preliminary things before we begin. I want to welcome you here. This is, and this is a little confusing to me, but by my count, this is the 275th town meeting. I'm not sure whether it's the 275th or the 276th, since we just celebrated in 2017 the 275th year since Northampton became a town in 1742. But Cynthia Swank gave me these numbers a year ago, and I keep adding 1 year to it. Absolutely, she's just confirmed my belief that it is correct, 275th annual town meeting. Well, to start our meeting on the right foot, Mr. Majori has agreed to lead us in a pledge allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Not yet. Okay. So I would like to introduce some of the people that are part of this meeting. As you signed in, you met two of the three supervisors of the checklist. Jane Morse is here and Hope Miller. Jill Brandt had to be away. But those are the three supervisors of the checklist. They are the ones who keep our voting records straight as they can be, and make it possible for us to function as a town with a town meeting process, and also for the national and state elections as well. My assistant moderator, Bobby Burns, is here, as is town clerk and tax collector Sue Buchanan. We have select board members here, James Majori, Larry Miller, Kathy Kilgore, and we have our fire chief, who is also the acting town administrator, Mike Tully. And on my left is the budget committee, and I'm going to ask Jonathan Panett to introduce the members of the budget committee that are here.
Go down the row here. We're going to all introduce ourselves. So my name is Jonathan Panett. I am the chair for the Northampton Budget Committee.
John Anthony Simmons, Budget Committee member.
Laurel Pohl, Budget Committee.
Okay, thank you. In a moment, we'll get into the moderator's rules, which hopefully you picked up a copy of when you came in. Mr. Majori asked for a point of order. He is being mysterious about it. He hasn't told me what it's about, but.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's about you. We have met here 275 or 276 times, and I think for those you have served us for the better part of 18 of them. 200 of them. 200 of them. Okay, we're going to have to change the engraving on the clock. I think we missed the number a little bit. But you have served this town so remarkably well. You've kept order in these meetings. You've kept us on track, and you have been a wonderful source of knowledge and certainly inspiration, too, on a lot of issues. So we are certainly going to miss you and want to offer a small token of our thanks to you for all of your years of service. Kathleen, I guess I could take this out. Oh, I guess I can't. I'll hold it for you.
Bill, we give you this clock, commemorative clock. So when you are no longer standing in this room or sitting in this room, that you remember us and how much we appreciate all your service over the years. William S. Besh, Town Moderator, with grateful appreciation for 18 years of service. So why did you say it was 200?
Well, he said it was 200.
Thank you very much. I will be very brief. When we moved here, I was just getting out of the Air Force. We bought a house in October of 1971 here, and I had been at Pease Air Force Base, and before that, Westover. And I had grown up in Arlington, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C., and we had lived in Arlington and Alexandria as a married couple before going into the Air Force. And so coming here from a place where you were pretty much anonymous and your participation in government was very remote indeed. And lo and behold, we came to our first town meeting, was in this room, and the bleachers were over there, and the folding chairs were out here, and we went through the warrant articles, and not only discussed, debated, and amended them, but we voted on them right then. And Jane and I both thought, this is government at its best. And I have been privileged to serve in the school board and as a school district moderator and town moderator, and it has been a wonderful ride. It has been very interesting to me and very rewarding, and I thank you all for the opportunity to serve in this way. So, I mentioned the moderator's rules, and looks like I don't have a copy of them. All right, so they're blue. I haven't changed these rules in the last several years, and so there's nothing new for those of you who have been here before. But I always like to remind everyone that when you come up to speak, and the moderator recognizes you, you have the floor. But once you ask a question, you yield the floor, and so the moderator tries to find someone to answer your question, and then that person has the floor. So you don't get the floor back unless you ask for it and are granted. So let's just keep that in mind. Only one person has the floor at the time. There are really no conversations between people. This is a legislative body, and all the conversations are to the moderator, and if there are responses, the responses are to the moderator. So let's just bear that in mind. And then one other thing, in bold on the second page is an explanation of the restriction against reconsideration. If there's a motion and a second and a vote in favor of restricting reconsideration of an article after it's been discussed and amended or not amended, we can't go back to that article later in the meeting. We're done with that article, and it has to stand however it was at the time it was reconsideration was restricted. So that's very important, because even if we wanted to go back, we can't at that point. Any questions about moderator's rules? Okay. Article 1, and Article 1 is the election of officers, and the election of officers we won't discuss here, but it will take place at the second session. The officers' names will be on the official ballot under the position for which candidates have applied. So we have moderator, it's a 2-year term, and my assistant moderator, Bobby Burns, is the candidate for that position. We have select board member, a 3-year term, and we have 2 candidates, Larry Miller and George Chauncey. Town treasurer is a 1-year term. And we have a candidate for that, Barbara Kearney Dewing. We have 1 supervisor of the checklist, 6-year sentence. And that is Kevin Murphy. I don't mean to discourage you, Kevin. We have 1 library trustee, a 3-year term, Susan Leonardi. We have, I'm reading the candidate's name after each of these offices. We have 2 budget committee members, 3-year terms each. And we have, looks like 4 candidates. We have Rick Stanton, John Anthony Simmons, Burl M. York, and Tamara Lee. We have 1 cemetery trustee, and that's Margaret A. Brown. We have planning board members. We have 2 openings, 3-year terms each, and we have Phil Wilson and Wally Kilgore as candidates for those 2 positions. We have 2 water commissioners. Henry Fuller and Timothy Harnett have filed as candidates for those 2 positions. We have 1 zoning board of adjustment member, 3-year term, and Mark Janos has filed for that position. We have trustee of the trust funds, 3-year term, and Mary Lambert has filed for that position. So those are the candidates you will see on the official ballot in March. Now, Articles 2 through 6 are all zoning changes. These are articles, the exact language of these articles cannot be changed at this meeting. So without objection, I don't usually do this, but today I'm hoping that we will not be here for 6 or 8 hours, that we will be here for a reasonable period of time. So I'm going to, without objection, move consideration of the zoning articles 2 through 6 after Article 25. So we're going to start with Article 7, which is the first money article, and it's the operating budget. Any objection to that? All right, that's the way we'll proceed then. Article 7, we're projecting that on the screen. This is the operating budget for fiscal year 2019. We have a budget proposed of $7,124,725 with a default budget of $6,991,630. I recognize Mr. Majori.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move to have Article 7, the fiscal year 2019 operating budget, moved to the official ballot as presented.
All right, and Mr. Miller.
Mr. Moderator, I second the motion.
All right. And Mr. Majori, are you going to speak to this article?
Mr. Moderator, I would defer to our interim town administrator, Chief Tully.
All right, Mr. Tully.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The current 2018 operating budget is $6,982,118. The proposed 2019 operating budget is $7,124,725. That's a difference of $142,607, or 2.042%. As far as the default, the current default is $6,900,082,118. The proposed fiscal 19 is $6,991,630, a difference of about $9,500, or 0.136%. So where do the differences come in that $142,000 that I just talked about between 18 and 19? In the executive line, we had $23,000 increase in salaries, FICA, Medicare, retirement, et cetera. We had a savings of about $3,200 in town clerk and elections, mainly in hours for the deputies, the deputy tax clerk. And financial administration, increase of just under $11,000 for salaries, FICA, and retirement. Data processing, we're able to save about $2,500 with software upgrades. In the property valuation, we're able to save just under $2,000 for the fees with MRI that does our assessing in town. Legal, there was a $51,000 increase, and this is due to various tracts that the select board looked at with Coakley, Aquarian, et cetera. Personnel administration, $22,000 increase, mainly for health insurance. Planning and zoning, about a $1,500 increase for updates in the master plan, and also an increase for Jennifer Rowden, who's the circuit rider for Rockingham County that we utilize. General government buildings, savings of about $3,300. We changed around how the custodial hours worked in town. Cemeteries, an increase of about $6,000, primarily for tombstone restoration and grub control, lime fertilizer programs in our cemeteries. Insurance, we're able to save about $5,500 for workman's comp. $502 in addition for New Hampshire Municipal Association dues. The police department was able to save about $9,200 for in health insurance, which is a good direction to see. Usually you see health insurance going the other way, but we've hired plenty of young officers that are single guys, and we hope they stay that way, at least for budget's sake. Fire rescue, $26,000, mostly the cost of health insurance because we hired those young guys and they didn't stay single. Emergency management, about a little over $18,000, increased salaries, FICA, Medicare, and retirement. Highways and streets, an increase of $22,000, mainly for health insurance and salaries. We saved $600 in street lighting. We didn't shut off any lights before anybody worries about that. It was just consistent with spending, so we just brought that down. Brush disposal, cost us another $51 for brush dump permits. We were able to save about $5,000 in the cost of tipping fees for solid waste. $666 increase for recycling, for salaries, and also heating oil and propane. We were able to save $4,000 in the WICA charge for water services. Health agencies and hospitals were taken out of the budget. That's $4,250. As we move forward, you'll see that in a warrant article. Parks and Recreation increased about $1,400 for salaries, FICA, Medicare, and retirement. Northampton Library an increase of about $4,400, primarily for health insurance. And then we were able to save about $7,300 in debt interest, and that's what makes up our $142,607. About a third of that, a little less than a third of that, is for increases in cost of health insurance. Excuse me. So what I did is I put together a couple slides you can see. This is how those things come out in the increases, that 142. The most is legal increase at $51,000. Then we have a health insurance increase at $40,000. Public safety, which is fire, police, and code enforcement, all grouped together, is about $34,000. And then the additional $16,000 is general government, public works, et cetera. So where do we spend our money as a town? I don't think that it would surprise anyone to see in that dark green there that public safety, fire, police, and code enforcement is where we spend the most amount of money. Second is general government, a little over $1 million, followed by public works, about $1 million. Health insurance at about $890,000, and a few slices of the pie for other things around town, but that is generally how we spend our money in town. And that is a recap of the difference between fiscal 18 and 19, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or concerns with respect to the operating budget? Mrs. Swank. Ms. Swank.
Good morning, Cynthia Swank, Hobbs Road. I would like an explanation of who is doing the tombstone restoration and what's involved.
Okay. Is that microphone on, do you think?
I don't know if
Is Mr. Chevalier here? The
How about-
exact. I'm sorry.
One second. It's okay. You answer that question.
I can answer part of it. I was looking around the crowd for Mr. Chevalier, but I don't see him. The tombstone restoration, I'm not sure what company is doing it, but the idea behind it was that the cement has degraded over the years, and so he's picked the worst of the worst, and he's going to start each year and do as many as he can. The price varies as to how bad it is and what needs to be done for work, so he's going to pick as many as he can and start and go through as he moves, but I'm not sure what company he plans.
Who knows this? Anybody? Ada.
Arthur Nato, 34 Pine Road. I'm one of the part-time employees that works at the cemetery. Most of the work that requires any extensive stuff are the older stones that have fallen over and tipped over, or, they're going to approach that. And most of it involves just the work on the foundation underneath, which means prying it up, putting crushed stone underneath it, and settling it out. Other ones that are more complicated, ones that are cracked and fractured, those will be attended by a professional who does that type of work.
Thank you. Any other questions about the operating budget? Mr. Wilson.
This is an unabashed plug for the Rockingham Planning Commission and its new executive director, who in the course of the next few months will be approaching Northampton and other towns in the Rockingham planning area to aggregate their electrical charges under a cooperative agreement. Tim Roche, who is the new executive director, did this in the regional planning district where he was before and saved towns more money per town than they spent on the Rockingham Planning Commission dues. So you'll be getting a notice about that. Please don't just throw it in the wastebasket. It's a good idea. If you do throw it in the wastebasket, I'll be all over it anyway. So,
all right, thank you. I note that the operating budget is recommended by the Select Board, 3 votes in favor, and recommended by the Budget Committee, 6-3. Any other comments or concerns or questions with respect to our operating budget, Article 7? If there are no further questions, the operating budget will appear on the official ballot as it has been presented in the warrant.
Mr. Moderator, I move that we restrict further consideration of this article.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second to restrict reconsideration. A yes vote on this motion will mean that Article 7 we're all through discussing today. A no vote would mean that we could later come back and revisit Article 7. All those in favor of restricting reconsideration? All opposed? Same sign? Okay.
Mr. Moderator, as a point of order, I don't believe you restrict reconsideration until after you've taken the vote, do you? I've never seen it come before
What vote are
you
you talking about?
There was no vote.
of the operating budget.
We're not voting on that today. We vote on that in March.
Well, if you have, well, that's fine.
That's what we have.
Okay, yeah. So, we don't vote on any of these articles today.
So if there's no amendments, then I've just used to seeing it.
If there are no amendments, there's no vote.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So Article 7 has been restricted, and it will appear on the official ballot as presented in the warrant. Article 8 is to modify the elderly tax exemption and to change or to establish age limits and exemption amounts and establish net income levels and net asset levels. I recognize Mr. Miller.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the Article 8 modify elderly exemption from property tax be placed on the official ballot as presented here.
And Mr. Majori?
Second.
All right, that's been moved and seconded. Mr. Miller, are you going to speak to this article?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I brought this article to the Select Board because it came to my attention that we have an elderly exemption program now. However, as you know, there is a thing called inflation, and I thought back in my Budget Committee experience, and I don't remember actually a time when these limits had been changed to reflect passage of time. Other towns do, from time to time, change these to reflect increases in inflation. So what you see before you is an article that raises some of the floor below the elderly to keep up with inflation. The cost of this article to the taxpayer, when the Budget Committee, when the Select Board looked at this, we want to know what it costs. We costed this one as well as number 9, which is the next article. Just so you'll know, we're not talking about number 9 now, but we costed them together, so I don't know the difference between the two. But the cost together of this article plus the next one was about $7,400 a year for the taxpayers. So it's a fairly small cost to give a benefit to really the people that need it the most. So that's the thinking behind this.
All right. Any questions or comments on Article 8? Ms. Swank? And this time, could you get a little closer to that microphone or something?
Sorry, it's a little high. As the unofficial historian here, I think it was when Jenny Landman was on the Select Board, and that was a long time ago.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
A while
That was
ago.
a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Any other comments or questions on Article 8? Let me say my piece first. Okay. Article 8 will appear on the official ballot as presented in the warrant. Mr. Miller, are you moving to restrict?
Thank you for recognizing me. I move that we restrict further consideration of this article.
And Mr. Majori?
Second.
All right. All those in favor of restricting reconsideration of this article, down hands. Those opposed? All right. Article 8 is restricted. Article 9. This is another exemption, real property tax exemption. This one is called disabled exemption. Recognize Mr. Miller.
Mr. Moderator, I move that Article 9 appear on the official ballot as presented here.
Mr. Majori.
Second.
All right. Discussion, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As discussed before on Article 8, and as Ms. Swank has noted, this also hasn't been adjusted for a long time for inflation. If it was Jenny Landman at that time, that was at least 12 years ago, I would guess, at least. So again, this is to compensate for the passage of time and the inflation and to raise the floor beneath the people who are most likely to need taxation help. It affects only a few people, and the cost of this article, as I said before, with Article 8, the previous article, is a total of about $7,400. So the Select Board felt that it was important, and as you'll see, our vote reflects that. So I would ask you to put it on the ballot. Thank you.
Okay. And I note that this is recommended by the Select Board 3-0 and by the Budget Committee 9-0. Any other questions or any questions or comments on this article? Okay. Article 9 then will appear on the official ballot as it was printed on the warrant. Mr. Miller?
I move that we restrict further consideration of Article 9.
Mr. Majori?
Second.
All right. All in favor of restricting reconsideration of Article 9? Down hands. Those opposed? All right. Article 9 is restricted. Article 10, all veterans tax credit. This again is a credit article for real property taxes. And I recognize Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that Article 10, all veterans tax credit, appear on the official ballot as presented here.
Mrs. Kilgore.
I second that motion.
All right. Moved and seconded. Mr. Miller for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. 2 years ago, the legislature passed a law that modified the RSA governing this, that said that any veteran that chose to apply for a property tax exemption, this only applies to property taxes, could do so with this enabling legislation. That was 2 years ago. Our town did not adopt that RSA, so we kept our existing veterans tax credit of $500, which applied to all veterans who had ever served in the armed forces during a time of conflict, which covers most veterans, even though it doesn't have to be a declared war. It could be a police action like the Korean War, what a police action, right? But in fact, any time a veteran served during a conflict, that covers most veterans. However, the law did not allow veterans a tax credit if they had served at some other time. And as you know, sometime in the late 70s or 80s, we no longer used the draft, and therefore, anybody that served after that time were all volunteers. So when we see people go off to conflicts now, they chose to do it. So I think the legislature was wise in adopting and changing the law. So what the select board did was we looked at what other towns had adopted that, and then what was the cost when it was adopted, and how many people signed up afterward. So I did a cost estimate. I have it here if anybody's interested. But what it does is it shows that after the election, in towns like us in Rockingham County, most veterans that were going to apply had already applied under the previous law. So to estimate what our cost would be, we would anticipate 20 to 25 veterans apply with this new law. So in order to get a cost, that would be, let's say it was 20, and they all applied, that would be a $10,000 cost to the taxpayers. What that means to you is that's a penny on the tax rate. That would then, passage of this would allow all veterans to have a tax break if they applied. I think the select board believes that everybody in town would think that that's probably a small cost to pay to allow them to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions about the veterans exemption? I note that it was recommended by the Select Board 3-0 and the Budget Committee 9-0. All right, no further questions or no questions or comments on this article. We'll have this Article 10 will appear on the official ballot as it was printed on the warrant. Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that we restrict further consideration of Article 10, all veterans tax credit.
Mrs. Kilgore?
I will second that.
All right.
Get used to it over here.
All in favor of restricting reconsideration of Article 10? Down hands. Those opposed? All right, Article 10 is restricted and will go on the official ballot as printed in the warrant. Article 11, this is an article that funds the proposed fire department collective bargaining agreement, and it shows the cost of this collective bargaining agreement over the next 3 years, 2019, 20, and 21. I recognize Mrs. Kilgore.
Mr. Moderator, I move we place Article 11 on the official ballot as read.
Mr. Miller?
I second the motion.
Mrs. Kilgore, you going to discuss this article or present this article?
Yes, I would like to present this article. In the fall, the town engaged in collective bargaining with the fire department union representing them. I was the select board's representative on that negotiation team. The purpose of our negotiation was to foster harmonious relations between the town and the union and to establish a collective bargaining agreement, wages, hours, and other terms and conditions of employment. We met for, with about half a dozen meetings over the course of the fall, finishing up in December. And the proposed collective bargaining agreement is the result of both sides working respectably together to understand the needs and wants of each side and finding a compromise that would work for both. The increase in salaries represent something I believe is comparable to what the private sector sees. They're not exuberant increases in salary. And then also in this agreement is some savings the town is now seeing on healthcare, because the fire union has agreed to pick up additional cost of their costs of health benefits. Over the next 3 years, it's a graduated amount they're picking up. At the end of the 3-year period, the fire department will be contributing 14% of the premiums, and the town's part will be 86%. Another item that will help save the town some money in this collective bargaining agreement is the agreement that the fire employees can now cash in unused vacation time each year, instead of having it roll over and grow each year. So if they want to cash it in, they can do so. They have to, there's parameters in regards to, as we come up to the end of the year, notifying us on how much they want to purchase back so that we can budget for it. That's about it.
All right, and this, correct me if I'm wrong, but this also is asking, this article is not only asking us to approve the 3-year contract, but also $34,827 for the first year.
Yes, $34,827 will be the cost of the first year.
And I see that the select board recommended this to the town or the legislative body 3-0. The budget committee voted 6-0 with 3 either abstentions or absences. Is that okay? Thank you, Mr. Burnett. So are there questions or concerns about this collective bargaining agreement and the cost items associated with it?
Good morning, Mr. Moderator. Craig Solomon, 100 Woodland Road.
Good morning,
and I
Mr.
want to
Solomon.
commend the negotiating committee on a good job. My review of this indicates a couple of other things that I'd like to just bring to the attention of the people who are going to watch this at home. Ms. Kilgore addressed the buyback provision, and an important part of that is this. If a firefighter has accrued vacation time and takes the vacation, then his shift is filled by someone who will probably get paid overtime. Whereas with the buyback, that shift doesn't have to be filled at overtime, it's just regular time. So it has the potential to save the town money. Secondly, the cost increases in the second and third year are capped at 3% of CPI. And currently, under the old contract, it's 2.9. So the maximum exposure for the town is 0.1%. However, we see the Fed raising interest rates. I think they're concerned about inflation. So I think that provision, which was negotiated, is also a great benefit to the town. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Solomon. Mr. Nato.
Arthur Nato, 34 Pine Road. Just one point of clarification. As this meeting is being done, the article in this particular case is presented and not read. So the motion that Ms. Kilgore said is as read, and it's presented to us.
Okay, just good point. As presented, or as it appeared in the warrant article. Yeah. Any question? Yes. Ms. Swank.
I'm sorry, I must be really awake this morning. I'm curious how there can be 3 abstentions. on something like this by the Budget Committee?
Mr. Panett, you want to see if somebody wants to respond to that?
Thank you. I was one of the abstentions, and the reason was we were still asking for more information at the time the vote was taken.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
One comment I'd like to make is we continue to talk about our emergency services people as firefighters, and I think everybody knows the bulk of what they do is emergency services. And I say that not just to make the point, but rather to emphasize that I think it is incredibly important we have the very best, most highly qualified people in those positions, not only to fight fires, but in particular to do the rescue services that I personally have experienced. We need it. So I urge us to start at least acknowledging it's both firefighters and EMS, okay? The other thing I'd say is I noticed that figure 34,827 and the following ones, I think as Ms. Kilgore said, are net figures, net of the savings from health care benefits from whatever was the increase in pay. Is that correct?
Yes.
So then my question is, how much of it is actually increases in the pay that the EMS people will receive? And I don't care about the absolute dollars, I'm interested in the percentage. And then the question that follows from that is, are we competitive? Before you went into the bargaining arrangements, did you compare what we are paying our firefighters and EMS personnel in comparison to other communities in the region, particularly those to which we have lost personnel recently, because anybody who's been involved in this kind of work knows turnover is far more expensive than the cost of pay increases that enable you to attract and retain the very best people. So those are my two questions. What's the percentage increase in pay? And secondly, is where we are now competitive with other communities in the region?
All right, I'll try to get you an answer to those two questions. We'll pause here a minute while they dig that out.
I didn't know the percentages.
So it's 2.5 the first year, but you add 1,000. So that would be 2,000 the first year to make them competitive. It is 2.5 the first year, and then 2 to 3 depending on skills next year.
1,000 for each one?
Just for the officers, because the officers weren't competitive, the firefighters were.
So in the first year, we added 1,000. No, 5,000. 2,000. Right.
All right, so while we're waiting for the information, I'm actually going to open up the Budget Committee meeting as of right now so we can actually vote. For some reason, it just passed my mind to actually open up our meeting this morning. So I officially are opening up the Budget Committee meeting. Here you go.
Mr. Moderator, can we recognize that I did that too?
Yes, we can. We can. They just want the opportunity to change the vote if necessary on any of the articles. So they both have published notices that they were going to meet today, and they're just officially opening their meetings. We're still in legislative session, though. So.
Mr.
All right.
Moderator.
Yes, Mrs. Kilgore.
To answer the question that's on the floor, the first year number in increase in salaries reflect the acknowledgement that the officers in the fire union their salaries were not comparable in comparison to area communities around us. And taking that into consideration, the first year numbers reflect a $1,000 increase for the officers to bring them in line with other communities around us. That being said, the first year increase is 2.5% in year one, and then in year 2 and 3, the negotiated amount will be between 2 and 3 according to the CPI that is calculated each year.
Okay. That seems to answer your question. Does that generate a follow-on question for you?
The follow-on question is, does that bring us into a competitive position, or is it simply a move in the right direction? I mean, are we now at the median of the municipalities with which we would like to compare our salaries? Or are we in the bottom quartile, or are we the top quartile? Where are we in relation to that? Because if we're not at least at the median, we're still not competitive.
Okay, thank you. Do we know the answer to that?
Yes, we do. We are competitive. We looked at it, and the numbers that we presented on both sides make us competitive in the communities surrounding us.
Okay, thank you. Reassuring. All right, any other questions or comments with respect to the proposed collective bargaining agreement dollar amounts? Yes, Ms. Pohl.
Just to provide a little context, another one of the reasons that we were digging for more information was there were collective bargaining agreements in 2012 and 2015. And in 2012, the CBA, the first year hit to the tax rate was actually negative. It was $47,640 that we got back from that collective bargaining agreement. In 2015, that was, and the previous one was 2011, 2010, and it was also negative. So the fire department gave back a lot more in concessions than we gained in debt, or not debt, that we paid in increases to the salaries. The last two have gone completely the other direction. In 2015, what was negotiated was an increase to the CBA. It was $100 and some odd $1,000, and then again, the proposed increase is a total of another $130,000. That's just to provide some context.
Thank you. Any other comments? Or yes, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think the answer to that, I was on the last negotiating team for the previous contract. If we hadn't paid what we'd paid, you wouldn't have emergency services. As Mr. Wilson has pointed out, losing people to surrounding communities means we send our experienced people and someone else pays them, and we paid the bill to train them. If we don't pay a competitive wage, they won't be here, and then when someone calls, such as happens quite often, more likely in a health-related emergency or for I-95, we're not going to have the complement to answer. Also, this town has said that it wanted a paramedic available for every shift. Now, that is a 5% increase in the pay of a firefighter who has spent at least 22 months, in our case, at their expense, being trained. We don't pay for our paramedics to receive their training. They pay for it. You can't have the best if you're not willing to pay a competitive wage, which is what we do. So I would respectfully say that this money is well spent, and I would also say that the negotiating team, which I was not on, and Ms. Kilgore led, and did a great job, cut a really, really fair agreement with the firefighter union. So I commend them both to come to an agreement that serves both parties well, and that's really what a contract is all about, being fair to both parties and continuing the services that everybody in here wants when you dial the phone and somebody's there in 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any other comments or questions on the collective bargaining agreement? I would only add to this, not a pro or a con comment, because the moderator's not supposed to do that, but I would say that if you have an opportunity to attend one of the fire rescue, the EMT rescue presentations, I encourage you to do it. You have no idea what they do and are expected to do, and their ability to get a person who is suffering from some accident or illness to the hospital in a short period of time with emergency service, emergency care en route. It's really quite remarkable what they're expected to do and what they do on a regular basis in this town. So, all right, Article 11, if there are no further comments or concerns about Article 11, it will appear on the official ballot as it appeared in the warrant. Oh, we do have a comment, okay? Mrs. Heffernan.
Just a quick comment. Rachel Heffernan, Atlantic Ave. So I was a paramedic for Exeter Hospital for about 10 years. When I first started there, I was a resident here in town, and I was kind of appalled at the fact that we didn't have our own medics at the time. We worked a system, double medic system. I could be in Epping, my partner could be in Raymond. If we were split, if we were together, we could be anywhere. I think we did 17 towns. And as a resident, it was scary when we got a 911 call that required paramedics. So serious heart, trauma, overdose, anything that required intervention, airway. And I could be in Raymond. And we sometimes actually split. So we'd be responding from 10, 15 miles away. So I just want to stress like how important it is for our town to have paramedics on every shift. You could literally be waiting for 10 minutes, and if that was your family member or your child or your mother or your father, just anyone, it's a long time to wait. And from a professional level, I've worked with a lot of these guys, done calls with them. They're amazing. We have good people. We want to keep them. I feel really passionate about it, and I just want to stress that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right. Any more? All right, if there are no further comments or questions.
Sorry. Yeah, I
Okay.
just wanted to provide the numbers, and I also want to clarify that just by providing numbers doesn't mean I'm against fire. But for history, it was $47,640 to the negative in 2012, $557,000 in 2015 to the positive, and this year it's only $34,827. That's the increase to this year's tax burden.
Thank you. All right. We done? All right, Article 11 will appear on the official ballot as it appeared in the warrant.
Mr. Moderator, I move we restrict further reconsideration of this article.
Thank you, Mrs. Kilgore. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
All right. Moved and seconded to restrict reconsideration on Article 11, proposed fire department collective bargaining agreement. All in favor? Down hands. All opposed? Okay. Article 11 is restricted. Article 12, replace six-wheel DPW dump truck with plow and wing. Mr. Miller.
Mr. May. Okay, I got this.
All right, I've got them backwards. Okay,
sorry.
Mr. Majora.
Mr. Moderator, I would move that Article 12, replace six-wheel dump truck with plow and wing, be moved to the official ballot as presented.
And I have Mrs. Kilgore.
Mr. Moderator, I second that motion.
All right, moved and seconded. Discussion, Mr. Majori.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The proposal here that comes from our Highway Department and that has been vetted by the Capital Improvements Plan and supported by the Select Board and by a majority of the Budget Committee is to replace the 1999 plow that we have with the, the dump truck with the plow and the wing. While that vehicle is still serviceable, it has been identified as being at its end of life. The proposal is to replace that vehicle with this one, but to keep that vehicle as a backup. That will be important because we no longer have the rental option that was once available to us. So if that vehicle, the current one that we have, the 1999, goes down, we don't have a reliable rental available to us. The proposal here is for the vehicle is priced out at $203,000. And to use a phrase that we've heard many times before, all up, all in, that includes everything that has to be on it. I assume that includes a heated cup holder for Hub while he's driving around, but I'm not sure. And the proposal is a 7-year lease on this, which would mean that in the first year, that the first year's payment on that lease would be $29,000, and then each subsequent year, $29,000 going into the operating budget. I don't believe there's anything else I have, Mr. Moderator.
All right. The moderator does have a question about this one because I know.
No, we won't plow your driveway first.
But actually, Hub told me that this wing plow, this new wing plow has a special release for each mailbox on the route so that mailboxes don't get bashed. On articles, this Article 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17, there is a reference to the capital improvements plan. Is there someone here from the capital improvements committee that could give us a little history on what that committee is, what it does, and how it comes up with its plan?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Nancy Monahan, I'm chair of the Capital Improvements Committee. I can give you a brief background and hope to be what you're looking for.
I think.
This is from the New Hampshire Municipal Association. The preparation and adoption of a capital improvements plan is an important part of a municipality's financial planning and budgeting process. The purpose of the plan is to recognize and resolve deficiencies in existing public facilities and anticipate and meet future demand for capital facilities and the replacement of vehicles and equipment. A plan typically includes all of the all the anticipated capital expenditures of a town for the next 6-year period. A capital improvements program acts as a bridge between the planning process and the budget process. With all of the information gathered during the CIP process, municipal officials can help voters make informed decisions about appropriations and policies. The governing statute for capital improvements committees is RSA 674, and it outlines the responsibility and authority of the CIP. The committee shall review and classify projects according to the urgency and need and shall recommend to the Select Board and the Budget Committee a time sequence for their implementation. The program shall be based on information submitted by the departments and agencies of the municipality. Whenever the CIP committee is authorized and directed to prepare a CIP report, every municipal department and every affected school district board shall, upon request of the CIP committee, transmit projects it proposes to undertake. The CIP committee shall study each proposed capital project and shall advise and make recommendations to the Select Board and the Budget Committee. Northampton's first CIP committee was created as a subcommittee of the Planning Board by the legislative body in March 1988. Then at the town meeting of 2010, the legislative body voted to create a CIP committee independent of the Planning Board, composed of one appointed member each from the Select Board, Budget Committee, Planning Board, and School Board. In addition, there are 3 at-large residents of the town appointed to this committee. At the town meeting of 2015, the legislative body approved adding an 8th member of the committee from the library, and that position is appointed by the library trustees. Northampton's CIP committee meets most every Friday through the summer. The committee meets individually with each department head, the school representative, and the library representative to review all their proposed projects. After fully studying each project, the committee prioritizes all projects for the upcoming fiscal year as required by the RSA. The CIP report also includes a list of the capital projects proposed for the subsequent 5 years. Those recommendations are contained in the final CIP report and is presented to the Select Board by October 1st in time for the budgeting process.
Thank you very much. I think that's very helpful to have the history of that in connection with the money we're spending. Thank you. All right. Any questions or concerns about Article 12? Mr. Stanton.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Rick Stanton, 108 Walnut Ave. I would like to make a motion to amend Article 12, and I have a copy of my amendment proposal.
Okay.
I would like to make a motion to amend Article 12 entitled Replace the Six-Wheel DPW Dump Truck with Plow and Wing, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Select Board to purchase and equip a 6-wheel dump truck with a snow plow and wing plow for the Department of Public Works in the amount not to exceed $180,000 from the unassigned fund balance. This item has been identified as the number 2 priority in the capital improvements plan for 2019. There will be no impact on the tax rate. I'd like to just further comment on the rationale.
Before we discuss your motion, is there a second? Okay, Mr. Solomon has seconded your motion, so now we can discuss it.
The rationale, this truck and the plow will become the town's primary snow plow, and we know that that is important. There will still be approximately in excess of $200,000 left in the unassigned fund balance above the 8%, which is part of our ordinance. The balance would still be in compliance with the unassigned fund balance ordinance. It would immediately save $24,000 in interest costs. It would save having to raise $29,000 from taxation, almost 3 cents on the tax rate, for each year for 6 consecutive years, therefore saving the taxpayers money. So this is a direct return to the taxpayers of their tax dollars. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Okay. Any comment? Mr. Panett.
Okay, so just so I understand, you're making a proposal for $189,000 as opposed to the 203.
180.
180,000? Okay. All right, give me 2 seconds then. Okay, so that's a difference of $23,000 that is not going to be I'm just trying to understand what the actual proposal was. So we're not going to raise and appropriate, that's just going to be coming out of the fund, so that's it. Right, so we're going to be purchasing this outright rather than leasing this. Correct. Right.
Okay, you understand the proposal? So do we have any comments on or concerns about the proposed amendment?
I do have one other comment. I'm in
Oh,
favor.
yes, Mr. Panett.
Right, I'm in favor of that as opposed to actually leasing the equipment, so.
Mr. Moderator, if I may.
Okay, go ahead, Mr.
I did receive, through the courtesy of Mr. Majori, asking Mr. Hubbard of DPW for the breakdown if we were to be able to buy the piece of equipment outright. And he said the annual payment has the interest built in at 3.8%, with the first payment up front. The total cost then of $203,000. However, if the purchase price is purchased, if the purchase is done outright, it is $179,000, a savings of $24,000. And I made the motion for $180,000 in case we did need that cup holder for Hub.
How cute.
Yeah, Mr. Miller.
I'd just like to say that the reason the article you have before you is Article 12 was recommended by the Budget Committee by the Select Board 3-0 is because I think the committee agreed that this was such a large article to ask the taxpayers to pay for. We thought it was very important, but for such a large article, we thought it should be put before us as an appropriation, and we knew that there would be a financial cost to finance it. But that was my feeling at that time. I know Mr. Majori brought it before us as an option to pay for it in cash, as is being suggested, at least for myself. I thought it should be appropriated. What I'm for is we need the truck. That's what I'm for, because if you've walked past the town shed and seen the 1999 International truck, you'll realize it's tired. It really is tired, and we have no backup at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Ms. Pohl.
Yeah, I'd just like to remind everybody, this did fail last year, so the truck is 1 year out of cycle, if you will, the replacement cycle. But there's also, if I heard correctly, there's $203,000 that we're going to take out. Okay, that would raise the total amount that we're taking out of the undesignated fund balance to $325,000 this year. Oh, it's 180? Let me do the math. $302,000 out of the undesignated fund balance this year with all the warrant articles.
Okay. Pause here for some reaction. Yes. Mr. Majori?
Mr. Moderator, may I ask through the interim town administrator if he would give us an update on the total in the undesignated fund balance and maybe request of Ryan to come up and speak to that if you don't have it, Chief?
I believe the percentages are 11.9% of the budget, which is roughly approximately 2.4 million. And Ryan is shaking his head yes, and I always believe Ryan.
We're speaking budgetese here. Can somebody explain to the uneducated what?
May I, sir?
Yeah, all right.
I just wanted to, let's let our chair do this. Just to be clear, the fund balance is at a certain number, and the select board has adopted a point where we want to not go below that, to stay in a realm where we can effectively finance something if we wish to. That is our credit rating. So the difference between where we want to be and where we are reflects money that was unspent that was later captured for the town. So it's a savings bank, as it might be called. So the difference between that is what we're discussing, and that money will sit there unused. And the point I think is being made here is that is the choice of the town to use those unspent funds rather than appropriate new funds if you've already got the money, which is doing nothing because it's sitting in a rainy day fund, and unfortunately it probably makes like 2% a year or something. It's making nothing. So that's I think the point being made here. So Mr. Majori can address the how much.
Okay, Mr. Majori.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Moderator, in April of 2015, the town approved the Northampton Fund Balance Ordinance, and this ordinance, which Mr. Miller has summarized for us very well, spells out the different ratios or percentages of which DRA and the GFOA recommend that our fund balance.
DRA being and GFOA.
Department of Revenue Administration and the Government Finance and Accounting Office, I think, or something. I think I've got the acronym wrong in my head. This ordinance allows for 3 uses of our fund balance policy. By the way, our policy, our ordinance sets a minimum balance of 5% and sets a target balance of 8%. And as the chief has stated and our finance director has confirmed, our balance now stands at 11.9%. So we are over our target balance by approximately 3.9%. The fund balance uses include, or it reads, the select board may appropriate any amount of undesignated fund balance in excess of the designated percentage for the following purposes: to offset property taxes, to be a contribution to a capital reserve fund, expendable trust, or other single purpose fund, to purchase one-time capital items, and for emergency purposes as deemed necessary. So the purchase of this capital expense would be covered under the ordinance.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Yeah. Mr. Sununu.
Perhaps I could elicit a nod from Ryan as well. If we are at 11.9% and our target is 8%, and we're at 2.4 million, am I correct that our target balance at 8% is about 1.6 million? Would that be correct math?
Yes. Roll it, Ryan. Yes.
Okay. So we're about 800,000 over our target balance.
Yeah, I just did run numbers. I put it
Yeah.
somewhere in 600.
Right.
772.
I got the nod, so.
Mr. Tolle, be sure to use the microphone when you yeah. Mrs. Kilgore.
Mr. Moderator, I would just like to clarify, when we started the process of the warrant articles, taking in consideration what we were going to move forward to March, the chair started this conversation by making a list of suggested items that was very thorough. And the original suggestion was to look at funding most of these warrant articles right out of the unassigned fund balance. The process then was, during public meetings, to walk through that. So if I recall, during our workshop on that snowy Thursday night, when we were going through the warrant articles, this came about, and it was originally suggested that we do it through the unassigned fund balance. We talked about it, and we knew we had a long list of other items that were going to be suggested to come out of the unassigned fund balance. So we actually tabled this during that workshop to address later after we got through the whole list of them. And I would say right now, we're kind of in that same situation. we have other items on this warrant article that are that have been suggested to come out of the unassigned fund balance. So we need to collectively look at what's coming out as a whole when considering this amendment.
So tell me what the select board is recommending here. Are you in favor of this amendment or not?
Well, I think there's another question or another comment first. I first proposed it coming out of the undesignated fund balance. So I'd be more than willing to listen to the rest of the discussion, and then we can take a vote on it.
All right.
Happy to do that for you.
All right. Mr. Stanton, further.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just to save you some time and arithmetic, if you take all of the warrant articles and take the unassigned fund balance commitments, it's $552,000.
Mr. Moderator, could you have that repeated again, please?
I believe what Mr. Stanton said was that if you add all of the warrant money from the unassigned fund balance, the total is $553,000.
$552,000, and that includes the $180,000 of the modified warrant article.
So 552?
For all of them, including this one here.
552,000.
Mr. Moderator?
Mr. Ferraro.
Yeah, could we get a clarification? Is that just the ones that currently call for expenditures from the unassigned fund balance plus the 180? Because I don't get that number.
That is correct.
Mr. Stanton?
I get it. I validate it.
Okay.
It's correct.
Do you want to take a minute and verify that
Please,
that is correct?
We have a third party doing it.
Okay. All right. Well, they do that, Mr. Solomon.
Other funds.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to be clear.
A lawyer always knows the answer to the question he asks.
Well, it depends on who's asking. The question I have is, assuming this 553 figure is accurate, and it's all approved by the deliberative session and approved at town meeting, we would still have an undesignated fund balance in excess of the target number.
Of how much?
Article 16.
That's what we seem to be saying here. That's what the mathmaticians here are trying to calculate.
What I heard earlier is we have approximately 800,000 now over that target of 8%, which is the upper end of the policy.
And so if this $552,000 figure is correct, we're still over the target.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All right.
This sum still comes from there. Yeah, so it's 100.
We'll give the Budget Committee a few more minutes here. Yes, sir.
Jim Better from 102 North Road. Just going back on the dump truck, is there any residual value in the resale market on the existing truck?
Another 100.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
The existing truck that we're looking to replace, is there any value for that in the resale market?
Oh, the 1999 truck, do we have, would we keep that? I think that's what he's asking.
Exposure is 55,000.
Mr. Kelly.
Do I see Director Hubbard here today? I knew I'd find him.
He just, we caught him daydreaming about his cup holder.
We meet,
Mr. Hubbard.
We meet again, Mr. Moderator.
Right.
Maybe for the last time, I don't know.
No.
Yeah, just to get something
That's
straight, what was the question?
The question was, does the existing aged truck have any market value?
It does, however, usually on a trade-in, you get marginal amount, usually not what the truck is actually worth. And at the time, once the thing is approved, then you go to the dealer, and they come out and they'll look at the truck and give you a figure, whether you accept it or not, or whether you put it out for auction. That's up to the town to determine. We have invested some money into this truck. It's one of the mainline trucks. Over the last 5 years, we completely rebuilt the body, the front end, the brakes, hydraulics, lights. It's still workable, but it has become a nuisance during storms. It's not completely reliable. And we only have 2 big trucks. This is one of them, and it's very important, especially during big snowstorms. And I will not be driving this truck, just so everybody knows. So I don't want to waste any money on the heated cup holder for this truck. If anybody gets in the old truck, that'll be me, you know. And during big storms, the other truck will come in handy. The amount that you're going to get from trade or selling outright probably is not worth the availability of having that truck for the DPW.
Kind of a backup.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll sleep. My hair won't turn gray as quickly, and I'll sleep better at night.
We want you to sleep better.
Okay,
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Simmons.
Yes, before Mr. Hubbard goes, John, I've heard that the old truck is a 1999, and I heard one comment that it's 1 year out of service. So what would the life expectancy of this truck be? Is it somewhere in the 15-year window, or?
Mr. Hubbard?
Yep. Mr. Moderator, this truck would be, has a life expectancy of 20 to 25 years. Okay. So if it was leased and paid off after 7 years, you would get that much service out of it. The body on this truck is stainless steel. It doesn't rot like the old trucks. And the fact that we have the facility that we have now, we're actually seeing the life expectancy of all the vehicles going up.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Ferraro.
Yeah, just back to the totals that we talked about. We confirmed that it was 552.
552.
If, including the 180, we missed one that we thought was in another revolving fund. That would be about 80% of the unassigned fund balance, not counting the rating day fund.
All right. Thank you.
80% of delta.
The overage.
Of the excess.
Mrs. Pohl, did you have a question or
Yes.
comment?
Sorry. Is this on? It's not on? All right. So this is the sort of fiscal analysis that I think the CIP committee is supposed to do, but it's not done, and so we don't have all these questions that come up during deliberative and during the budget session, but it wasn't done. I'm sorry, I was looking in the wrong column before, but the $552,000 is the amount that would come out of the undesignated fund balance. Now, the problem with taking large chunks like this out of the undesignated fund balance is it lends itself to creating great swings in the tax rate. Considering what's coming out of the capital reserve fund now, what's proposed to be coming out of the unreserved fund and the capital reserves, you should see the tax rate take a deep dive next year.
Okay. Thank you for that comment. Mr. Miller.
Hub, do I understand this correctly? You have 3 trucks or 2 that you plow with?
We have 6 trucks that we plow with.
Okay.
Five are owned by the town.
So the new truck is needed to replace the capabilities you have because this truck isn't reliable. Is that true?
True.
Okay. The old truck isn't worth selling but it is worth as a backup, because you don't rent backup services anymore, is that true?
No, we would like to, but the availability is not there in case. Usually when the time that you need the backup is during a emergency snowstorm, blizzard, whatever, and anything you try to use is not available. It's already being used. So there's not equipment sitting out there that you can rely upon, in the middle of the night if this should go down.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Can I make a further comment, Mr. Moderator?
Pardon?
Could I make a further comment?
Yes. Mr. Miller.
When the Select Board considered this article, I felt it should be through taxation. And I disagree with Jim. I think my point here is that we need the truck. And if we pay less for the truck, that's fine with me. I still feel when this article is voted on, it's going to help the town. If it passes, we get the truck and we pay less. If it doesn't pass, we get the truck, and I hope it will pass on the ballot, because I think people will get a chance to pass it. So unfortunately, I'm going to stick with my vote and want to put it on the ballot, because then everybody that's not here will have a chance to vote on it. But if the members here, citizens here, change that, that's fine with me too, but I'm going to stick with my feeling that it should be on the ballot. Ergo, because everybody then would get it's a big item. Thank you.
Yeah, you're saying that, make sure that I understand what you just said. Your preference would be the article to remain as it was presented in the warrant.
That's correct. I'm not against this article, this amendment, because it saves money. But I originally voted on something, and I'll speak for myself, and after I voted, we came to an agreement, we sent that to the Budget Committee, and the Budget Committee made its choice. So I would be pulling my vote out from underneath what they chose to do, and therefore again, for me, it's a win-win, because we get the truck, hopefully.
Okay.
But I don't want to change my vote on the Budget Committee, because that's what they used to consider, hopefully, in their choice, so.
All right.
Mr. Moderator, as a point of
Yes.
order, though, in either scenario, it goes on the ballot.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't the thrust of the comment, though. I mean, either as amended or as proposed, it's going to go on the ballot.
It's, if the amendment passes, we buy it outright. If the amendment doesn't pass, we buy it.
Peter Roby, 87 Exeter Road. So as I'm sitting here listening to this conversation evolve,
Yeah.
how's that?
Good.
There's got to be a reason that you guys all came up with the solution to finance the truck and not pay for it outright, and I haven't heard that reason yet, because this sounds like a no-brainer to pay for it outright after all the numbers have gone through. And so I just want to know, what is the reason you decided to finance the truck and not pay for it outright?
Thank you.
At the time, Kathleen has related the night we were working on this, and Jim had suggested that we could avoid taxation on many items that were before us, because so much unspent money had been captured over the years. It's called good management. And the point was, okay, well, let's consider things that, not just that we need them, but if we say we're going to put this on the ballot and it doesn't affect the tax rate, we're spending money, right? But it's not going to be reappropriated. So we were thinking, well, I think there's a lot of things we could use and we could get right away, which we need, and you'll see that later on. But as Kathleen had said, at that time, we had this long list, and this was the first in the list, and it was the largest. So we went and considered all the rest, and you'll see those later on. and I'm not sure they all are, but most of them we talked about, we said, let's take it out of the fund balance because it's judicious and they're not huge. And the other thing for me was this truck was on the previous ballot and it failed. I felt that was wrong. I voted for the truck the last time and it failed. It was a needed thing. I think it should have passed, but it didn't. I think it should pass this year, and I think it will. But it's most of the people that voted on it to deny it are not here. They're not here. So I sort of feel like I should stick with my vote and try to put it back on the ballot and pass. And as Mr. Simmons has said, it's going to be on the ballot anyway. It depends on whether it's going to be from taxation or it's going to be from the fund balance, but it's going to go on the ballot. I just want the truck.
Let me use a simplistic example, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong, because that's the way my mind works, simplistic. If I have savings, maybe I have $60,000, $100,000 in savings, and I go out to buy a new car, I can either pay for it out of my savings or I can pay for it in installment over time. Isn't that what we're talking about here?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Burnett.
So we do have a motion on the floor, and I'm going to make the recommendation to call a vote. So the motion is to...
Well, I'll do that,
Right.
okay? Yeah. All right. Yeah, yeah, we're going to, I want everybody who has a chance, who wants to speak on this.
Mr. Moderator, I thought you were going to make a further comment to what you said. And the point is, if you've got $60,000 sitting in savings and you got a choice to either spend or finance, you look at what return do I get on that $60,000 and how much is it going to cost me to finance? I assume in our kitty, the return we're getting is de minimis, probably close to zero these days, maybe going up in the next few days. And the finance charges, as I recall, were 3.8%. So if you pay for it out of the money you've got saving in excess of our target, so we're already in excess of the target, we're not having to pay that finance charge. And so we're saving the 3.8%, and we're still within our target, which I think was prudently set at 8% above the budget. So it's a simple choice, I think, as you put it. I think sort of simplistically, too, sometimes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Okay. Mr. Roby.
So, Pete Roby, 87 Exeter Road. So, the answer to my question that I asked was, originally when you guys discussed this, you didn't have the big picture of what was going to come out of that rainy day fund. And that's why you decided, you know, there's a lot of other things here that we're going to take out of that rainy day fund, and we might use up our surplus over our target that we want to keep in that rainy day fund. So let's finance this truck. But now we're here today, and we know the big picture. And it seems like it makes sense to take it out of the rainy day fund. Like you said, either way, either the amendment or what's right here, we are still voting on getting a new truck. But it seems like to me that most people would want to vote on this and save money. So is that the answer to my question, was that you didn't have the big picture and when you first started talking about this?
Mr. Ventura.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And this goes to your first question, Mr. Roby, and then the follow-up question. Mr. Moderator. You're accurate as presented by Mr. Miller and Mrs. Kilgore about looking at all of the items in totality and then coming back to this one. And then you asked why was the vote 3-0. I think you were going to that question, and I voted in favor. Like Mr. Miller has said, I definitely want this vehicle. It's important to us. And so I voted in favor of getting the vehicle. I'm going to vote to support this amendment because I think using the money in excess of our target is a wise choice at this point. And I did not want the ballot to show a 2-to-1 vote, which would have led people to believe that somebody was against the purchase of the vehicle. If I had voted against taking this out of tax, if I had voted against it, it would have been against the funding mechanism and not the principle. So I'll be voting in favor of the amendment.
Okay. Can we vote on the amendment? All right, so Mr. Stanton has proposed and Mr. Solomon has seconded an amendment to change the wording of Article 12 to read as follows. To see if the town will vote to authorize the select board to purchase and equip a 6-wheel dump truck with a snowplow and wing plow for the Department of Public Works in the amount not to exceed $180,000 from the unassigned fund balance. This item has been identified as the number 2 priority in the capital improvements plan for 2019. There will be no impact on the tax rate. So a yes vote on this will change the language of Article 12. A no vote will leave Article 12 as it appeared in the original warrant with a lease purchase arrangement. All those in favor of the amendment signify by raising your voting card. Down hands. Those opposed? The amendment passed. Any other comments or concerns before we leave Article 12? Yes.
I'm just, for clarity for the public and for the select board and the budget committee, we have changed a warrant article, and therefore we have the boards have the right, reserve the right to revote that article. If we restrict reconsideration, does that then preserve, is our right to revote still preserved?
Yes.
Okay, so the public knows that we will still revote these if that's the option.
Right. Yes, Mr. Burnett.
Will you allow the 2 boards to actually vote while we're going through, or would you rather have us vote at the end of?
You can vote at any time before we print the ballots. So you just need to let the moderator and the town clerk know that you've changed your vote.
Okay.
All right.
We'll do it now.
All right. So, yeah, yes.
Mr. Moderator, I'm kind of looking at the chair of the Budget Committee also to see if this is the right idea. Do you want to take up, Mr. Moderator, would you allow the Select Board to take up a vote now if the Budget Committee also is thinking it's a good idea?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Let's have a quick discussion. So the board?
No. What we want to.
At the end.
There may be other amendments.
Okay.
Okay.
The Budget Committee would prefer to wait.
All right. Budget Committee's waiting, so.
I believe the Select Board would like to take up their vote now, Mr. Moderator.
Okay.
With your permission.
All right.
Given the amendment and my support of it, I would move then to place the warrant article, or to recommend the warrant article as it has been amended. That's the only thing I can do.
I'll second that.
And then, since we are here in public session, that would call just for a simple vote. And this is just the select board.
Yeah.
All in favor? And that's 3-0. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Okay.
Mr. Moderator, the board has decided that we're going to actually wait till Tuesday, where we actually have a full board in order to vote on.
Good idea. Good idea. But then you just need to let the town clerk know that you've taken your vote. Okay. Thank you. All right. Is there a motion to restrict reconsideration of this article?
That sounds good. Oh, I'll put my hand down.
All right. Second?
I'll second the motion to restrict.
All right. All those in favor of restricting reconsideration of Article 12? Down hands. Those opposed? All right. Article 12 will appear on the official ballot as amended and is now restricted from further reconsideration at this deliberative. Article 13, road resurfacing. And I'm going to recognize Mrs. Kilgore as the moving party.
Mr. Moderator, I'll move we place Article
13.
13 on the official ballot as it appears, as read. As
As it appeared in the warrant.
As appeared in the warrant.
Yep. Okay, Mr.
Second.
Majori. Are you going to speak to this article?
Yes, I'm going to speak to this article, Mr. Moderator. Currently, the way this article is written, this is a hybrid of there's a hybrid of funding. So part of it's going to come out of taxation, and part of it's going to be withdrawn from the Municipal Transportation Improvement Capital Reserve Fund. As stated, $30,000 would come out of the reserve fund, and the balance of $200,000 would come out of taxation. The $30,000 coming out of the reserve fund is consistent with prior years. That is a reserve fund that is replenished every year by the $5 registration fee on motor vehicles collected. So this fund, this $30,000 represents the consistent amount of money that kind of comes in, and we take it out to help supplement I believe it's the 15-year road resurfacing plan as outlined by HUB. This year's appropriation represents the 8th year in the 15-year program. As you know, New England weather is really hard on our roads, and us consistently tackling a piece of our roads every year is financially sound. I recommend that we continue to support this as we have in the past as a town. We've supported it with really strong votes at the voting box.
Thank you, Mrs. Kilgore. Any questions or comments on Article 13, the road repaving program?
He should run the town.
Okay. If there are no questions or comments, then Article 13 will appear on the official ballot as it appeared in the warrant. Mr. Miller?
I move that we move to restrict Article 13 from further consideration.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor of restricting further consideration of Article 13? Down hands. Those opposed? All right, Article 13 restricted. Article 14, replace fire and rescue department command vehicle. This is $55,000 for a replacement of the vehicle, and the funds are coming from a special fund, the Fire Department Equipment and Apparatus Special Revenue Fund. I recognize Mr. Miller.
Mr. Moderator, I move that Article 14, replace fire and rescue department command vehicle, be placed on the official ballot, placed on the warrant as presented here.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded, sort of.
Sort of. I fluffed through that pretty good.
Right. What I understood you to say was that you moved that the Article 14 appear on the official ballot as it appeared in
Yeah,
the
you want me to reword that?
warrant.
Have you word that?
That's,
All right. So, yeah, the handcuffs are on. Mr. Moderator, this article addresses the incident command vehicle, which is in the possession of the Fire Rescue Department. The present vehicle is a 2007 vintage, as I understand, and I've been around that long to see it. It's beyond its life. The Capital Improvements Committee has identified it for replacement, and the plan here is to replace it and keep the vehicle we have as a backup, because it's probably not worth much, but we could use a backup for the department. This is an incident command vehicle, so when you go to a place that's in trouble, whether it's just the fire rescue or also police, this thing is equipped with a command center that sits in the back of the vehicle. And I'd also ask our interim child administrator, who's also the fire chief, to weigh in on this article, if that's okay with you.
Mr. Tully.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This vehicle is a 2007. It was set to be replaced in 2017 after 10 years of use through CIP. That year, the vehicle was still in good shape. I took it down to the shop, put it on a lift, went underneath it with a mechanic, and we decided at that point that we could get a couple more years out of that vehicle, and we've done that. At this point, the vehicle is a vehicle that runs every day. It's used on just about every scene that we go to, and it has to be in a situation where it starts, runs, and drives every time we need it. And I just am not in a position where I feel comfortable that this vehicle currently is going to continue doing that. They don't tend to have a lot of value when you get rid of them, because we drill holes in the roof and in the interior when we put in radios and antennas and things like that. So it's not the type of thing where you'd get a lot of money for it, and we can utilize it inside the department as a backup for the rest of its use until we determine that any repairs that are needed are not worth fixing in the vehicle.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
We're on 14 now. Yeah.
There you go.
Right. 14. Okay. Thank you. Any questions about the Fire and Rescue Department command vehicle? All right. If there are no questions or further comments, then Article 14 will appear on the official ballot as it appeared in the warrant. And Mr. Majori.
Mr. Moderator, I move to restrict reconsideration of Article 14.
Is there a second? Mrs. Kilgore seconds. All those in favor of restricting Article 14, down hands. Those opposed, same sign. All right, unanimous. Article 15, purchase a police cruiser, and we're proposed to spend $37,000 from the police detail revolving fund for this purchase, and I recognize Mrs. Kilgore.
Mr. Moderator, I move we place Article 15 on the official ballot as it appears in the warrant article.
Okay, Mr. Miller.
I second the motion.
Okay, Mrs. Kilgore for discussion.
Yes, Mr. Moderator. This suggested purchase is to replace a 2008 Crown Victoria that has just under 100,000 miles on it. This has been identified by the CIP as an urgent priority for the police department. It is now part of a component of a new rotation for replacing the vehicles in the police department. The new suggested rotation is one vehicle a year, looking at a 7-year plan. we're afforded that ability to go to that is the fact that we just recently took possession of 2 brand-new vehicles due to other vehicles being crashed. So we thought it prudent to go to replacing one a year for a 7-year rotation. Of course, as we move through the 7-year rotation, we will be making sure that it still meets the needs of having the safe assets that we need in order to ensure services by the police department to the town. And another mention is it replaces a Crown Victoria. The town has made a decision to go to the sport utility vehicles as police vehicles going forward, and it is the goal to have all the vehicles out on the street in the front line, those sport utilities. We will be purchasing this outright and using the Crown Victoria now as needed as a vehicle for town employees while they're on town business to use. This does not affect taxation at all. The warrant calls to take the purchase price of $37,000 out of the police detail revolving fund. And just to give you some background, that fund has $102,000 in it currently.
Thank you very much. Questions or concerns? Mr. Nato.
Just one thing that people need to be aware of. One of the reasons that fund has $100,000+ is the town of Northampton, when it comes to policemen's salaries, is competitive. Because the policemen's salaries are competitive, we retain the people that we have. And now that we have a fairly close complement of people in the police department, we now can do our own details, of which the details earn money to pay for its own vehicles.
Thank you, Mr. Nato. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Mr. Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I was one of the, sorry. 50?
One of the 3?
I was one of the 3. I was just trying to make sure I was on the right article. I was one of the 3 here, and as a blanket statement for those that didn't watch the Budget Committee meetings, not in favor of particular language, and it appears in several, and this is one of them, but of the language identifying capital improvements plan committees, their recommendations, other comments that are made to varying degrees on the ballot. And I raised my concerns at the meeting for the use of the ballot as an advocacy tool as opposed to an informational tool. And reasonable minds can certainly differ as to which these are, but my concern is that that for the first time we're starting to insert more editorials in the substance of the article, and so it's for that reason that I'm in the minority on this and several other votes. I don't believe that, well, I don't believe that I've received the answer to the questions that was going to be sent off as to the use of the ballot. I do know that there are other examples in other towns where there have been rulings that inserting things like this can be problematic under certain circumstances. So I look forward to that debate as a community and that discussion and collaborative process coming up as to what the wording on ballots should be. I just want to speak in favor of the actual article. So for that reason, I can't support it as a ballot wording measure, and I will remain in the minority on this and other ballot articles. But when I go to vote, I'll be voting for this article. And we had this discussion last year when there were some amendments to, I forget whether they were to just recommend against or amend, or I forget what the particular amendments were last year. But my comments then are as true as they are today, which is that when you start talking about vehicles and equipment, I'm very much a proponent of, if you ask a police officer to go patrol the community, that he or she needs an appropriate vehicle to do that work in. So I just don't want my votes on these articles to be reflective of anything other than my, shall I say, intellectual disagreement as to how we're presenting the questions to the voters. But I'm very much in favor of what I believe to be a long practice of sound vehicle management in this town. And I think some of the things that we've talked about here today on how to manage our money wisely are things that I support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Pohl.
I would also like to echo John's statements. The reason I voted against this is because of the language regarding the CIP in the article. I couldn't sign the CIP, so I don't see how I can vote for the article with that language in it. So I'm also probably going to, I shouldn't say probably, I'm also going to remain in the negative on this one.
Thank you. Ms. Wang.
Mr. Moderator, I thought the DRA reviewed all these warrant articles before now. Is that not correct?
They do, and our warrant went before the DRA, and it came back. Yes. Mr. Tully.
I appreciate Mr. Simmons and Ms. Pohl explaining why they voted against the articles and their thoughts on that. The wording is always a question with warrant articles. Our warrant articles get uploaded to what's called the portal. DRA goes over the wording of each article. They look at different things. They change the wording around. We had several changes that they changed the wording around in it, the way it was said, and wording that changed, and this was not anything that they hit on that they wanted to see change. So DRA did not have a problem with this language.
Thank you. Yes, Mrs. Pohl.
Sorry, I forgot the last part. One of the reasons I think this leans towards the editorializing side is because it didn't provide the most important piece of information that the CIP came out with this year, and that is the number, what its priority order is. The CIP priority ordered Articles 14, 15, 16, and 17, and their priority order is number 6, 7, 8, and 9. And that information isn't in here, which is why I think it comes to look like it's more of an endorsement. It didn't provide all the information.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hillier.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Hillier. I live at 3 Glendale Road. And as a person who doesn't watch an awful lot of Channel 22, but I do read the papers and try to keep up, I find it very helpful to see information on the ballot that guides me in the hard work of the Budget Committee, the Select Board, and whomever else. And the CIP, as so clearly explained to us this morning, has a big, largely background role. Perhaps it would be less objectionable to people if their stand accompanied the recommended by Select Board, Budget Committee, and other things. If we had some maybe more objective way of responding to that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hillier.
Mr. Moderator, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Simmons.
Thank you for the comment, Mr. Hillier. You're in the space that I was in when I had these concerns, and I didn't want to elongate my previous comments anymore, but since the comment's been made, I will say that at the time of the Budget Committee meeting, I mentioned that, for instance, when I was in the legislature, when there was the calendar for which bills you were going to vote on that day, there was a majority report and a minority report. And I'm right there with you. If you're going to start getting into whether there are certain priority, number 2, number 8, number 7, you either sort of go all the way with the explanation of as to what's going on, or you don't, in my opinion. And I realize that reasonable minds will differ, but this is exactly the space that I'm in when we're talking about this. And I just feel that traditionally we've had Select Board recommendation, Budget Committee recommendation, and you either go to those respective boards' meetings to figure out why they're recommending that way, or you come to the deliberative like so many of you have here today, or you read the paper, or you listen to candidates, or you read flyers that come in the mail to sort of fill in how you feel, but that the ballot is not the appropriate place for that discussion, and that's the space that I'm in. I appreciate the comment very much.
Okay, thank you. All right. Yes.
Deb
Mrs.
Soleil,
Soleil.
Atlantic Avenue. I'm having a hard time with this only because it says recommended by the Budget Committee, 6.3. And so when the average person reads it, I hate to say it, but a minority follow what's going on, watch 22, read the papers. And so when people do come to vote, a lot of them have no idea and have never read these before. So they're really looking to see, is it recommended? And this does say recommended 6-3. It doesn't say, I didn't like the way it was written. And so therefore, it is extremely difficult to understand what you think. And if you really didn't like the way it was written, I would have preferred that to be discussed before we got here today and before the public doesn't know what you mean. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, are we ready to move on here? Okay. We had no amendment to this article. Yes, let's go.
Mr. Moderator, in light of what Mrs. Soleil has mentioned, and I don't even know if I can do this procedurally, so I apologize. You can just tell me to be quiet. If it would be more clear if the language was changed in an amendment, would the Budget Committee reconsider revoting on it to make it more clear at the ballot? Is that wrong?
Oh, okay, well, you're asking a question.
To you, I just,
So the Budget Committee will reconsider a revote, but we will not be voting today. It would be on Tuesday at our next meeting regarding the school. My personal opinion is I agree. The votes on the ballot speak more than anything else. So if we need to strike, this item has been identified in the approved capital improvements plan, and then that way we get a majority vote, then, that's what we should do. So to answer your question, we will reconsider the vote, but it will not be today, it will be on Tuesday.
Okay, thank you. Are you asking to be recognized again?
yes, please.
Oh, okay.
But can I, as a resident, make a motion to amend this?
Yes, you
Do
may.
you want me to go up there, or?
You go up there, because when you're sitting here,
Yeah,
it looks like,
that's why I wanted clarification.
I think it's useful. We should try to keep it.
Mr. Moderator?
yes, sir.
While
Farrar.
while we're waiting, just
Yes.
a clarification on some of the on process. On warrant articles, the Budget Committee cannot change the words during the budget meetings. All we can do is vote to recommend or not recommend the language presented by the Select Board, just so that that's clear. So all we can do is look at this, listen to the arguments, and make a vote on recommendation or not. This is where it can be changed today.
Thank you. Okay,
Kathleen
Mrs.
Kilgore, 220 Atlantic Avenue. I make the motion that we amend this article, Article 15, to read as follows. To see if the town will vote to erase and appropriate the sum of $37,000 from the Police Detail Revolving Fund for the purchase of a police cruiser. Approval of this article will have no effect on the tax rate.
Okay, is there a second?
There is.
Okay, Mr. Simmons seconds that. Do we need discussion on this? No.
We've got plenty of it.
All right. All right, so if, yes, ma'am.
Mr. Moderator, Jane Besh, Atlantic Avenue. I think we're muddying the water. We've already had 2 articles go on the ballot saying that they were part of the capital improvements plan. We know that that's a legally constituted part of the town government. The language has been okayed by the DRA. I don't understand why we're going to take it out of some and not take it out of others. It's just confusing.
All right, thank you. Mr. Wilson. So much for getting out of here at noon.
Phil Wilson, 9 Runnymede Drive. I want to agree with what Ms. Besh said, and I would also state that I think the Capital Improvements Plan Committee does a very diligent job of reviewing and recommending things, and I think that the information that they have recommended this, and it's in part of the Capital Improvements Plan, is an important part of the overall management process of this town. And the Capital Improvements Planning Committee is a very responsible part of that management. It is, and that's why it was instituted. Frankly, that's why it was moved out from under the Planning Board.
Thank you. Well, if I were not standing here as a moderator, when my wife speaks, I usually say yes, Chair.
Smart.
So, I'm wanting to vote on this amendment.
Can I be last? May I, sir, be last?
Do you have a further comment?
Yes, sir.
Oh, please do.
Okay. So everybody will understand, the Capital Improvements Committee is not controlled by the Select Board. They are not controlled by the Budget Committee. They are a deliberative body in town that delivers their choices and deliberations to both bodies before the budget process starts. As to the wording on the ballot, I find it helpful, but of course I voted for the article. But I will say to you that there was some discussion about this from the Budget Committee, which I am a member, and the question was, I thought the concerns might be alleviated after the DRA had weighed in on the wording of these articles that did include the notation of how from the CIP. Okay, everything that we've talked about so far, and everything on this warrant that everybody has, hopefully, has already been through the DRA. So if they wanted to change things, and they've changed plenty of things to correct the wording or order, they did that. So this is what they said we could do, and it's not something the Select Board can change. We can't, you can change it, but we don't, I don't think, want to change. This is what we voted on, and this is what we want to stick with. To me, personally, I find the notation helpful, and I like it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we ready to vote on this proposed amendment? So a yes vote on this would, if you look at the language, would take out the sentence, the next to the last sentence, which says this item has been identified in the approved capital improvements plan. So yes vote would take that sentence out. A no vote leaves that sentence in. All right? All those in favor of the amendment signify by raising your voting card. Down hands. Those opposed? The amendment fails. Is there any other comment or proposed amendment? Yes, Mr. Chevalier.
Kendall Chevalier.
Yep, up close to the...
I just got one comment about the type of cruiser you're buying. We've all seen in the news about all the police officers getting overcome in some of these cruisers. And just this last week, one cruiser just exploded sitting there in the yard. So I hope there's very careful consideration what we put our officers in with all these problems that have been showing up all over the country.
We want them to be safe, that's right. Yes, Mr. Tully.
I know that the department has looked into the cruisers and the CO problem, and there's solves for that. And we specifically are not going to buy the exploding cruisers. So we will definitely stay away from. I want you to have my word on that.
Criteria number 1, will not explode. Okay, Article 15 then will appear on the official ballot in the same form that it appeared in the warrant. Mr. Majori?
Mr. Moderator, move to restrict reconsideration of Article 15.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Those in favor of restricting Article 15, down hands. Those opposed? Article 15 is restricted. Article 16, resurfacing Dearborn parking lot. I recognize Mr. Majori.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would move to have Article 16, resurfacing Dearborn Park parking lot, move to the official ballot as presented.
And Mrs. Kilgore.
I will second that.
Okay. Mr. Majori for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The suggestion to appropriate $25,000 from the undesignated fund balance is to resurface the parking lot at the sole town-owned recreation facility that we have. Dearborn Park has one skin softball field, one t-ball field. It has tennis courts, of which one also serves as a basketball court. It has a playground area behind the tennis courts, and then, of course, it has the pavilion. Dearborn Park is used not only by residents in town, it is also it's used by residents in town. It's also used for many tennis lessons, softball, and the fields down there. I'm sorry? Pickle. God, how could I forget pickleball?
I know.
It's used for pickleball in the summertime or throughout the year by many, many people. The Capital Improvements Capital Improvements Committee has identified the resurfacing of that parking lot as a priority. This was an article which we have contemplated previously and has not been on the ballot 3 years, thank you. 3 years for CIP, thank you. So the Budget Committee and the Select Board is recommending 3-0, and then I shouldn't usurp your responsibility to talk about the Budget Committee vote, but that's it.
All right. Any comments or questions about Article 16? Oh, Mr. Farrar.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I'm sorry to belabor language issues, but Article 16 and Article 17 have language about the town fund balance policy that isn't found in the article on the DPW truck, which is using unassigned fund balance, or any of the subsequent articles using unassigned fund balance. Nor does it discuss that if all of the articles that attempt to use unassigned fund balance are adopted, that over 80% of that excess will be drawn down. So I think I understand that it went through DRA and all, but it's inconsistent with the rest of the ballot. And I'd like to move, and I don't have it written down, but I'd like to move to strike the language that talks about the town fund balance policy down to where it says current balance is 11.9%, primarily to be consistent with all of the other articles that move to draw money from the unassigned fund balance. So I'll make that motion, and I'll scratch out mine to give you something in writing.
I would like it in
if there's a
writing, yes.
second.
Okay. Okay, so Mr., if you look at the article on the board here, as it appeared in the warrant, it includes a sentence that begins, "The town fund balance policy allows the select board to use fund balance in excess of the designated target percentage, parentheses, 8% of the total budget, including the school, close paren, for capital improvements." The current balance is 11.9%. His motion, Mr. Ferraro's motion, strikes all of that from Article 16. Is there a second to that? Who's the second? Okay, Mr. Nato seconds it. Discussion. Yes, Mr. Major.
Mr. Moderator, as the author, well, I was the one who suggested the language in there, and I would have no problem removing that piece to have it be consistent with the other articles.
Any other comments or questions about the proposed amendment? Yes, Mr. Nato.
Get Hub a heated coffee mug. No, so the truck. Just strike this language right here.
Arthur Nato, 34 Pine Road. To me, it only makes sense to strike the articles because that what Mr. Ferraro proposed to do and I seconded was because with all the separate pieces and parts of all these articles, the numbers don't make any sense if some would pass and some didn't.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Deb
Ms.
Soleil,
Soleil.
Atlantic Avenue. I'm still a little bit confused based on when I look at it, it says recommended, and I hear that you couldn't change the wording until today, so I understand that better, so I'm sorry, and I also appreciate all the work you do on this.
Deb, would you just get a little
Oh, I'm
closer to
sorry.
the microphone?
But I'm still confused as to either, is the article recommended or not? Because it doesn't say, I don't want to recommend it because I don't like the wording, but I really want to vote for it. And so I still find it very confusing to see it so split. And I don't know what the answer is for that, but I read it as, do you recommend the article or not? Do you recommend spending the 25?
Okay, thank you. And I think Mr. Panay has said that you all are going to take another look at this based on if this motion passes or this amendment passes.
That is correct.
You'll revisit that. Okay. Are we ready to vote on this proposed amendment?
Yes.
The amendment would strike the sentence, as I said a minute ago, would strike the sentence beginning, or the sentence that reads as follows: the town fund balance policy allows the select board to use the fund balance in excess of the designated target percentage, paren, 8% of the total budget, including the school, close paren, for capital improvements. The current balance is 11.9% A yes vote strikes that sentence, a no vote leaves it in as it appeared in the warrant. All those in favor of the amendment indicate by raising your voting card. Down hands. Those opposed? Okay, the amendment passes. Before we move on to Article 17, is there anything else here?
Mr. Moderator, I move to restrict reconsideration of Article 16.
Is there a second?
Mr. Moderator, I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor of restricting Article 16? Down hands. Those opposed? All right, Article 16 is both amended and restricted and will appear on the official ballot as amended. Article 17, replace septic system at the town hall. Sounds critical.
Only when you're flushing.
That's why we're here.
Okay, Mr. Miller.
Why we're here.
Mr. Moderator, I move that Article 17, replace septic system at Town Hall, be placed on the official warrant, official ballot as read, as presented here.
All right, thank you. And Ms. Kilgore. Mrs. Kilgore, you're seconding
Yeah,
this?
I second that.
All right. All right, Mr. Miller for discussion.
He's discussing.
So what everybody will know, the town hall is a very old building. I don't know how long it is, but it's in the place it's in now. At some point, we decided to see what it had for septic system. And it doesn't have a septic system, really. It has a dry well and not much else. So fortunately, we don't really have a lot of meetings there when people have the urge, but if we did, if it was a warming center, it wouldn't handle very much. So having made this discovery, the select board felt it was important to fix the problem now where we know we have it. We didn't know the dry well probably dates from the 1950s. So it appears to be a small amount of money to handle a problem before the problem becomes an expensive problem. So, and that was our thought.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Miller. Yes, Mr. Ferraro.
Mr. Moderator, I won't go through the explanation again, but I'm going to move to strike the same language that we just struck from the previous article.
All right,
and
is there a second? Is there a second?
I have a donated pager.
Yes, Mr. Chauncey. Okay, thank you. All right, so we've had a motion and a second to strike the same language about the fund balance policy that we just voted to strike from the previous article. And are we ready to vote on this proposed amendment?
Yes.
All right, a yes vote strikes the sentence just as we just did in the previous article. A no vote leaves that sentence in this article. All those in favor of striking, down hands. Those opposed? Okay, the motion passes, the motion to amend passes, and we've stricken that language. Is there any other discussion on Article 17 with respect to the septic system before we move on to Article 18? Mr. Hilliard.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jeff Hillier, 3 Glendale Road. In view of the wonderful tenor of today's meeting, among people who don't always agree, I am hoping that the respective boards will take into consideration the thoughts, statements that have been made about how people voting purely on the ballot will take the various boards' recommendations. And if you are able to review your votes And if you are able to review the power of your no vote to voters who otherwise would look at this, thinking that you're opposed to the vote, I'm asking that the board members, particularly the Budget Committee, if you're the folks who are going to be reconsidering, that you do so in view of how this meeting has gone today. And I thank you very much for your continuing hard work on our behalf.
Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes.
May I make?
Mr. Miller.
I move we restrict further consideration of Article 17.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, moved and seconded to restrict. All those in favor? Down hands. Those opposed? All right, Article 17 is restricted, and it goes on the official ballot as amended. Article 18, contributions to health agencies, and this is our annual donation article, and I recognize Mr. Major.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move to have Article 18, contribution to health agencies, move to the official ballot as presented.
And Mrs. Kilgore.
Mr. Moderator, I'll second that.
Okay, Mr. Majori for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. When the Select Board was originally contemplating the operating budget, we had contemplated taking health agencies and hospitals, which has these two accounts, and social services out of the budget and put on a warrant, put each of them on the warrant, so that the town could have the option about whether or not they wanted to, or how they wanted their money to be spent. And this would be a donation to those funds. We've had healthy discussions at the Budget Committee level, the Select Board, and so...
No pun intended.
Yeah, no pun intended, thank you. And social services was put back into the budget. I think, I won't make any assumptions, I think we had intended on putting health agencies back in the budget also, but missed that window. So it remains as a warrant article. So the suggestion here is to fund the health agencies at the appropriations which had been contemplated in the budget originally at $3,500 for Seacoast Mental Health Center and $750 for Lamprey Healthcare, which is consistent with prior year appropriation and requests from those agencies. As a side note, I would like to say that I commend the chief and et al., whoever else was responsible, and certainly at the suggestion and recommendation of the Budget Committee, that a vetting process be implemented as a policy to understand what these agencies are asking for, and that we have a better understanding, the town has a better understanding about what they are asking for, how often they are asking for it, and I believe that policy has already been implemented. You've sent that information out to these agencies so that we have a better grasp about how the voters' money is being spent, correct? Good, so thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Okay. Any questions on Article 18? All right. Article 18 then will appear on the official ballot as it appeared in the warrant.
May I make a motion, sir?
Yep, Mr. Miller.
I move that Article 18 be restricted from further consideration.
Mrs. Kilgore.
Mr. Moderator, I second that.
Okay. All those in favor of restricting Article 18, down hands. Those opposed? Article 18 is restricted. Article 19, this is titled Contribution to the Earned Time Settlement Capital Reserve Fund, and it appears to be recommended both by the Select Board 3-0 and the Budget Committee 9-0, and I recognize Mrs. Kilgore.
Mr. Moderator, I move we place the Article 19 on the official ballot as it appears in the warrant article.
Okay, thank you, and Mr. Majority.
Second.
Okay, to Mrs. Kilgore for discussion then.
Okay. The purpose of this fund is to buy out employees' earned time during any time of their lifetime career. This is the fund that we use when employees leave the town to pay the liabilities that we owe them for any earned time they've accrued during the time with us. Currently, the balance of this fund stands at $19,740.04. As good management practices, we are always keeping an eye, a forecast on potential employees that could be departing each fiscal year going forward. Of course, we don't want them to leave, but it's always a possibility. And it isn't a choice. When they do leave, we have to make payment in full on their last day of employment. As you'll recall, last year, as in years before, this is a warrant article that's always on the ballot. We're always, in the past, have put a reasonable amount of money to keep the fund healthy so that we can use it. Last year at the ballot, at the voting booth, the townspeople voted not to put the recommended $30,000 in. So we have, in the past year, we've tapped that because we've had a few employees depart. So the purpose of this warrant article is to put funds back into this funds in case we have any employees that depart in the next fiscal year. The recommended amount of $70,000 is a combination of how we came to that amount was the fact that we didn't put $30,000 in last year. We have a consistent history of putting about $30,000 in, so it's a conservative amount, and the other $30,000 would be this year's. And the recommendation is for this to come out of the unassigned fund balance, so there would be no effect on taxation.
Very well explained. Any questions about this article, Mr. Nato?
Mr. Bully.
Arthur Nato, 34 Pine Road. I would like to know what the town's liability is as of today. If people that had substantial amounts of monies, how much is that number?
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Tully.
Liability on earned time is difficult to calculate because it changes depending on what time of the year somebody leaves. The fiscal year runs July to July, so if somebody retires today, and these figures are done that I'm going to give you are done in November, if somebody waits until July to retire, it changes the whole figures. So currently, we're looking at a very, very conservative, the most conservative, which was in November's numbers when we were going through the Budget Committee, we're looking at $66,000 liability for people to leave and retire. Altogether, outfigured for the next 10 years, we're just over $200,000. But like I said, those figures can change considerably depending on what time of the year somebody decided to retire.
Thank you. Mr. Tully. Any other questions on Article 19? Yes, Mr. Miller.
Hearing none, I move that Article 19 be restricted from further consideration.
You're one step ahead of me. I was just about to say, if there are no further questions or comments, Article 19 will appear on the official ballot as printed in the warrant, and you have now moved to restrict this article. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of restricting Article 19, hands. Those opposed? All right. Article 19 is restricted and not amended. Article 20, contribution to the town building maintenance capital reserve fund. I recognize Mr. Miller for motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that Article 20, Contribution to the Town Building Maintenance Capital Reserve Fund, appear on the official ballot as presented on the warrant. Thank you.
Okay, and Mrs. Kilgore.
Mr. Moderator, I second that.
Okay, Mr. Miller for discussion.
This fund, Mr. Tully will tell us in a second how much we have in the fund now. This fund is used to fix what needs to be fixed with all of our buildings. Presently, we have before us the things like the fixing of the steps that go into the old library. We have not identified yet what the cost will be to address the historical outside renovation of the town hall. We have the as of yet undecided or unknown cost of the fixing of the heat loss of our the wood portion of the fire public building. I guess that's the Chevalier building, we call that now. If anybody's been by there to go in the building in the wintertime, you'll see the building is encased in ice. And we know that the problem with that is stemming from heat loss that goes to the roof and causes all of the snow to melt and then comes down the side of the building and freezes on the side of the building. And every year we have to replace a lot of the siding, and we have water problems and whatnot. So we have this maintenance capital reserve fund available to fix what gets broke, and with old buildings, it's pretty regular. The thought in this process of the select board was we have money in the fund balance that's not paying us any interest, and we know we'd like to fix some of the problems with these buildings, and therefore, why have the money sit there with no benefit? And if we could put it in the capital reserve fund, then we can turn it into things as we are able to do that and take care of them. That's the thinking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Miller.
Excuse me, Mr. Moderator. Could I ask our interim town administrator, fire chief, to tell us what's in the fund balance?
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Tully.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Currently in the fund balance is $197,837. And if I can paint a little bit more of a picture for you, we average about $100,000 a year in maintenance on buildings. Currently, right now, we have 4 projects that are linked that should get accomplished. We have a fire department boiler for $40,000, repointing of the stone building and fixing the steps, which is about $12,000. The town hall project that we're putting an RFP out for now, we don't have a price yet. We're expecting it to come in somewhere at $75,000 to $100,000. And then there's a project in the town hall that Mr. Miller spoke about with the roof that has a few more pieces to the puzzle, but it would involve closing the town offices for about 30 days, and that's going to be well over $100,000, and that hasn't been, we've only gotten one quote on that. We're hoping to find a different way of going about that. We'd like to see 2 years of expenses in that fund. The last 2 years, we've been fortunate. We were able to spend out of the budget because we didn't have any police officers. We thought it was rather important that we get police officers, so we don't think we're going to have that ability again.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tully. Questions? Okay, Article 20 then will appear on the official ballot as printed in the warrant. And Mr. Miller.
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to, I move that we restrict further consideration of Article 20. That's it.
Ms. Kilgore?
I'll second that.
All right, moved and seconded to restrict. All those in favor of restriction? Down hands. Those opposed? All right. Article 20 is restricted. Article 21 to modify the purpose of the town building capital reserve fund. This is changing the purpose of a fund, as it says, and it's recommended by the Select Board 3-0, Budget Committee 9-0. Mrs. Kilgore.
Mr. Moderator, I move we place Article 21 on the official ballot as it appears in the warrant article.
Okay, Mr. Majori.
Second.
Okay, Mrs. Kilgore for discussion.
Yes. This is a change in wording of the use of the funds only. As currently written, the money in this fund can only be expended if the town chooses to build new town buildings. These funds cannot at this time be spent if the town chooses to renovate any existing buildings. The purpose of this change is to give more options to the town for the use of the funds when the time comes to address our aging town buildings. This was a discussion item in the CIP, and it is in the CIP report that it is recommended that we add the word renovations to existing buildings as well.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments? Mr. Wilson.
Bill Wilson, 9 Runnymede Drive. I just want to make sure that there is no confusion between this fund and the fund mentioned in Article 20. These are two separate funds, correct? And I think that needs to be, the reason I'm saying it here is because I hope people are watching this, because I think it could be confused that we're actually modifying the town building maintenance fund so it can be used for this other purpose.
Okay. Somebody want to comment on that, Mr. Tully?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Wilson. The Article 20 is the Town Building Maintenance Capital Reserve, which pays to maintain our buildings in the community. The Article 21, we're talking about the Building Capital Reserve Fund, which is a capital reserve fund that the town puts money into in order to save up to purchase and build new buildings later. So there's a different aspect. If we hadn't changed the wording on this fund, we wouldn't be able to look at renovating in a plan later on if that's what the town decided to do.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments? Okay, Article 21 will appear on the official ballot as printed in the warrant. And is there a motion to restrict?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Moderator, that we restrict, that we move, I move we restrict further reconsideration of this article.
Okay, second?
Second, thank you.
Okay, moved and seconded to restrict reconsideration of Article 21. Those in favor? Those opposed? All right, Article 21 is restricted. Article 22, contribution to Town Building Capital Reserve Fund. I recognize Mrs. Kilgore.
Yes, I move, Mr. Moderator, I move we place Article 22 on the official ballot as it appears in the warrant article.
Mr. Miller.
Second.
Okay, Mrs. Kilgore for discussion.
It was the select board collectively this year decided to take a year off from addressing the municipal town buildings and how best to go forward. I think there was a lot of thought that went into this, thinking that we needed to step back after having 3 years of a whole municipal campus project go in front of the town, and each 3 years it was defeated. There were a lot of emotions. The community itself was divided. It was very heated and emotional, and I thought the board thought it might be a good time for us to step back and reconsider why it failed, you know, and what we could do to move forward at a later date successfully. I think most people will agree that something has to be done about the municipal buildings and their conditions and their sizes and the need to make them compliant to the services that we need to provide. So in lieu of that and trying to be responsible, we thought it would be a good idea that we contributed money to a savings account for the day we can and decide to move forward on how to address the municipal facilities. So Article 22 is solely about not completely ignoring the issue, but setting aside money specifically knowing that we have this liability coming up. The recommendation to raise these funds is to take it out of the unassigned fund balance, so there would be no effect to the tax rate.
Okay, thank you. Well explained. I note, Mr. Panett, that there was not wholehearted support of this article by the Budget Committee. Is any comment on that?
Would anybody like to speak on why they voted the way they did?
We can count on her.
Yes, well, I voted against this primarily because the undesignated fund balance, there was no analysis at the time of how much was in there. We were given this information later on in the process. If the CIP committee had done this sort of analysis, I probably would have voted for this. But I voted against it because I didn't know, there was no analysis of revenues, undesignated fund balance, where the funding should come from for this item. So I was left to do that on my own. And when we re-vote on Tuesday, I will probably vote in favor of this one.
Okay, so you all will have a chance to do that Tuesday?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Any other comments or concerns about Article 22? If there aren't, yes.
Good morning. My name is Giovanna Ruggiero. I just have a question. I just would like to follow, when you guys talk about the Capital Reserve Fund or the unassigned, where can I find that here, please?
They're not there.
So how can we understand then, when you request money, what percentage of your operating budget is? I'd like to understand that. Because I would like to know what percentage of your funds is actually into reserves and what you're actually working with. It's like you're asking for approval for something we don't even understand.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tully?
I'll try to answer this, and thank you. What you were just holding is the operating budget for the town, and that was our previous article. So unexpended funds, at the end of the year, the select board, at the end of a fiscal year, can spend what it needs, but what it chooses not to spend is, because it's appropriated, it must go someplace, and it goes into the fund balance that is unspent funds. And over the years, the town accumulates these funds, and they can be used for what Mr. Majori had said before, whatever sort of the select board says it needs within certain guidelines. So
Is it like a savings account or a money market account?
Well, no, it's an artifact in, the money is not in a drawer somewhere, but it is a difference between spent and not spent. So there's no drawer actually having $2 million in it right now, but it's in the flux of there. Is Ryan here?
Yes, Ryan's here.
You want to have him explain?
Mr. Tully?
Excuse me, Mr. Cornwell, could you come up and explain that there's no drawer of $2 million?
if you would explain what your role in the town government is, please.
Absolutely. Ryan Cornwell, I'm the finance director. Fund balance, for those of you not involved in government accounting, is essentially the town's equity. So the difference between our assets and liabilities being our equity. So there are components within fund balance, those items that are reserved for encumbrances, those items that, as we've talked about today, we've taken amounts that we've decided we want to use of unassigned fund balance. Those then get restricted and removed from unassigned fund balance until they're spent. So in essence, it's those amounts that have not been already legally appropriated for other purposes.
Okay. I can understand why she's confused. This is an accounting thing, right?
Correct. The only place you will see unassigned fund balance is basically on the financial statements. It's a component of presentation. Like they said, there's not a drawer somewhere that has this money in it, or a savings account that has just these funds. Our funds are all throughout various CDs and savings accounts and in other places. It's just that cumulative net amount that has not been obligated or appropriated for a specific purpose.
Okay. Thank you. I guess that'll have to do. Any other questions or concerns? Yes, Mrs. Pohl.
I'd just like to ask the woman who asked the question if she's any clearer on that answer.
All right. The moderator will ask her that question.
Thank you.
Conceptually, I am.
No, you have to get up close to the microphone.
Sorry, conceptually, I am, so thank you for asking. Sort of, right? I mean,
Sort of.
yeah. I thank you for this, because this is very important. And now, can I just ask, why were these not included in the package? Is it? So I was given a copy of the Capital Reserve Fund byline, and I think that this is important because we need to understand that, how it becomes a whole of our entire budget. I think this should be a part of the package that we get distributed. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Suggestion.
Yes, Mr. Majori.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. At the beginning of the budget cycle, the town prepares a budget book for the Budget Committee and the Select Board with all that information in it. So I just tore out my pages for the capital reserve funds that we have and presented them to her. I think that's a very good suggestion that we might be able to provide this to the general public. So
Okay.
that's the information that she had in front of her.
All right, thank you.
And thank you.
All right, any other comments or concerns on Article? Yes, Ms. Swank.
We're still on 22.
We're on 22.
Mr. Moderator, I would
And
like
a little
to
closer
know-
to the microphone.
Mr. Moderator, I would like to know why 100,000 and not more.
Okay. Ms. Kilgore?
Anybody want to take that one?
Mr. Majori.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for the question. We tried to find a number that is both responsible to what our needs might be and what is responsible for an additional tax burden. We threw around a number of different numbers. Is $100,000 enough? It certainly is not, contemplating what the needs might be, but it's a start. Had we come in and asked for $500,000, I imagine that kind of scrutiny would have been, we don't have the analysis yet to say that that is the right amount of money. $100,000, I believe, is a good start to where we're going to need to be.
Okay. Any other questions? Are we all done with Article 22? All right. Article 22 will appear on the official ballot without amendment. Is there a motion?
Mr. Moderator, I move that Article 22 be restricted from reconsideration.
Mr.
Second?
Moderator, I'll second that.
All right, moved and seconded. Those in favor of restricting Article 22, down hands. Those opposed? Okay. Article 22 is restricted. Article 23, modify the purpose of the town revaluation capital reserve fund. Mrs. Kilgore.
Mr. Moderator, I move that we place Article 23 on the official ballot as it appears in the warrant article.
And Mr. Miller?
I second the motion.
All right, moved and seconded. Before I turn to Mrs. Kilgore for discussion, I note that this is recommended by the Select Board 3-0 and the Budget Committee 9-0. Mrs. Kilgore.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is a change in wording of the use of the funds only. As currently written, the funds are to be used to carry out a full town evaluation in fiscal year 2013 to comply with the state of New Hampshire's requirement for municipalities to perform property revaluations every 5 years. As written, we cannot use any of the expended money from this fund to pay for reevaluations going forward, the next one being in fiscal year 2019. This modification of the wording does not tie the use of these funds to a specific year going forward. It ties it to the time of every 5 years as required by the state. This change will allow us to use the funds in this balance to pay for the reevaluation we are required to undertake in fiscal 2019. If this modification is not made, the funding will have to come out of the general operating budget. And the balance of the fund, which is currently $63,795.51, would have to just remain in this fund as a balance, unusable.
Okay. Pretty clear. Any questions about this article? Yes,
Mr. Moderator, just one general comment on this. I'm sorry, thank you, Larry. Article 23 and also on Article 21, you'll notice it says 2/3 ballot vote required. The reason we need a supermajority is because you are looking to amend the intent of a warrant article already contemplated in a previous year. I meant to say that on 21. I apologize for not saying it.
I apologize for not calling it the attention of the group myself. Thank you. Mr. Solomon.
Mr. Moderator, I have a question about the wording of this article. The second sentence seems to explain that it was established in 2011 and specifically authorized expenditures for fiscal year 2013. But as I read this, it was confusing, and I'm wondering if there's a reason why that second sentence is in the article.
Okay.
Could I speak to that?
Yes, Mr. Miller.
It's intended to be confusing, and you picked up on it. And we're shocked. If you understand what we're saying, Ms. Kilgore says if we don't change the wording, which was a mistake, by the Constitution, we're required to reevaluate the town every 5 years. Mistakenly, in the past, we actually put the years in, so therefore it restricts us, and what we want to do is do it every 5 years. So
Do you want me to clarify that?
I'm agreeing with you, maybe this could be worded a little better, but what we're looking for is the ability to do it every 5 years. So Craig, if you want to make it a little more simple, maybe you could help us.
I apologize,
You're
Mr.
not expecting a lawyer to make this.
Let me see if I can complicate this.
All right.
I haven't written this out yet, but I will.
Take a minute and write it out.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes.
Could I ask our finance director, Ryan, for clarification? I know these all went through the portal and through DRA. Was this one of the ones that they helped us with the language?
He's referring to his materials. He'll be
I
out
thought
in a
it just
minute.
dropped to the ground. I didn't want to
Right.
answer.
Trying to stay out of sight.
No, I think
It always works.
you'll be able to see what you sent up and what they sent back, right?
So the comment from the Ryan Cornwell, Finance Director. The comment from the DRA was threefold. Could you clarify what the warrant article is trying to accomplish? Which is why we have the language in there, specifically the gentleman just spoke of, to indicate to them that we believe it was too narrow a focus, as Kathy had indicated. Secondly, their second comment was required change. We initially had it as a majority vote, and they indicated to us that it needed to be 2/3. The last being, currently the Select Board, this is their comment, currently the Select Board are named agents to expend. If you would like to retain them as agents to expend, it will need to be stated within the article. If so, add the wording, and furthermore, to name the selectmen as agents to expend from said fund. That was not initially in the article. We added that based on the DRA's suggestion. So my only suggestion to you folks is that if an amendment is made, that sentence cannot be removed.
Right, correct.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Which sentence do you say can't be removed?
And furthermore, to name the Select Board
Oh,
as
right.
agents.
You're not referring to the previous sentence? Craig, what, if you would, I didn't realize you're left-handed. That's pretty painful, isn't it?
Why, it's taking him so long?
Yeah, and he's an attorney, and there's probably many attorneys in here. Are you suggesting, well, let's hear what you have.
Mr. Moderator, I've now prepared an amendment that I'd like to move.
Okay.
And I will
All right.
give credit for part of this to Mr. Wilson. I move to delete the second sentence of Article 23 and to add, this modification will allow funds as needed, the expenditure of funds as needed in any year.
Okay, so the second sentence now reads, this fund was established in 2011, and you're saying delete that?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, because it goes on to reference fiscal year 2013. And I think the intent here is to actually revise this so that the funds can be expended in any year as needed, and that's the purpose of this amendment.
Okay. So the amendment as proposed is to strike the sentence, this fund was established in 2011 specifically to comply with the New Hampshire State Constitution and carry out a town revaluation in fiscal year 2013, and insert a sentence which says, this modification will allow expenditure of funds as needed in any year. Is that your, is there a second to this? Okay, Mr. Wilson. Does everyone understand the amendment? All right. Any comments or questions? No? All right. All those in favor of the amendment? Down hands. Those opposed? All right. Article 23 then is amended by striking the sentence indicated, and in its place, this modification will be allowed to will allow expenditure of funds as needed in any year. All right. Any
Mr.
other-
Moderator?
Yes.
I move we restrict further consideration of this article.
Okay. If you'll let me just say before you do
Oh,
that.
I did it. I jumped. Sorry.
Article 23 as amended will appear on the official ballot. And now I will accept the motion to restrict reconsideration. And-
I'll second her
and a
motion.
second, and all those in favor, down hands. Article 23, those opposed? All right, seeing none, Article 3 is 23 is restricted.
It's freezing in here.
Article 24, close the fire department equipment fund. Mr. Miller. Oh, Mr. Majora. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move to have Article 24 placed on the official ballot as presented.
I second that.
Okay, moved and seconded. Mr. Majora for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In 2013, the town approved 2 new warrant articles. And what happens now is the revenues that we receive from ambulance billings go into these funds in the proportion 85% and 15%. 85% going to the to be able to fund the purchase of new fire equipment vehicles, fire rescue equipment vehicles, and 15% going into a fund for the maintenance of those vehicles. What that left us with is a fund, the Fire Department Equipment Fund, which we no longer needed, and I tore out the pages, but I think had $81.29 in it. So we can give that $81.29 to Hub for his cup holder, maybe, buy a little one for him if we do the money. But no, that money, the $81.29 would go into the general fund, I assume, Chief, if this fund, or if this warrant article is approved.
All right, thank you. Mrs. Pohl.
Just a quick question. Is there any reason why we didn't put that balance in the wording of the article? I think it would help people.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Is there any reason that we didn't put that wording for the balance in the warrant article? I think it would help people to know there was $81 in there.
At that time, whatever the number is at that time.
Mrs. Kilgore?
Mr. Moderator, may I respond to that?
Yes.
Okay. Until the fund is closed out, it, even though it's a nominal amount, it's still earning interest. So we don't want to close it out for a specific amount of money and then have 3 cents, 2 cents, $1 left in it. So this,
Do you
this
ever try
leaves
to
it
close a
ambiguous
bank
enough
account? Yeah.
to close it
3
out in
cents.
full.
Yep. Good point. Okay. And any further questions or concerns about Article 24? Okay. Article 24 will appear on the official ballot as it is printed in the warrant. Is there a
Mr.
motion?
Moderator, I'll move that we restrict further reconsideration of this article.
Okay, Mr. Miller?
Second the motion.
Okay, moved and seconded to restrict Article 24. All those in favor? Down hands. Those opposed? Okay, Article 24 is restricted. Can you believe it? Article 25.
Oh, we still have articles that you...
Yeah, I know, I understand that. Okay, Article 25, 10 minutes to 12. Purchase of a recreation van by citizens petition. And this is proposing to purchase the van that failed last year for $55,000, recreation passenger van. Someone want to move this, Mr. Chauncey?
Yes.
Okay. You're going to move the article, and we need a second before you can discuss it.
Yes, I move this article.
Okay, is there a second? Yes, okay, Mr. Burnett. Mr. Chauncey for discussion.
As a creator of this warrant article, I would like to explain my reasons. The existing recreation passenger van that we have today that our senior adult group uses, PASA, as well as other members of the town government, they use it for different functions. The main problem with the vehicle that we have today, it's not because it's old, it's because the way it's, the seating is configured, that our senior citizens have a very, very difficult time getting into that vehicle, moving around, in the way the seating is set up, it's just very difficult for them. The step to get in is very high, which makes it difficult. So we were looking into a Ford Transit van, 15 passenger. We had several of our senior citizens, along with our fire chief and myself, we took a look at this van to see if it would be much better for what they need. The seating can be configured when you order a new one any way you want it. So the ones we looked at had one seat that we would have to remove because it made the aisle just a little too cramped when you first got in. It has much more headroom. It's wider. It has a storage area in the back for walkers or canes or whatever. Now, I reached out to a local charity, which is the Fuller Foundation. They promised to give us, towards this purchase price, a $5,000 grant, as long as we match that $5,000 with money raised from the community. As of today, of that $5,000 we need for matching funds, we're around $2,500, so we're halfway there. We have people who are willing to donate. We haven't created a fund where you can donate that money yet until, we want to wait until this passes. If it passes the voters, I've talked to the financial director of town, and we will open a fund where this money can be deposited. In the meantime, it's just verbal. And I would like to have the town get behind this. Our senior citizens deserve it. You know, they've lived in this town a long time, paid a lot of taxes. And we're just trying to make their life a little more comfortable when they go on these trips. I figure the cost of the van is going to be around $43,000. We also plan to trade in our existing van, which we have an approximate figure of $8,000. And with the donations and the foundation money, you know, we'll probably get this down to about half the cost that was proposed last year when it was failed. And I know the reason it failed was because there was no effort to try to raise funds. It was purely going to come out of the taxpayer's pocket. But we've made an effort, and I would really like the community to get behind this. And that's the reason we're doing it. Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chauncey, for all your hard work on this. Appreciate it. Mr. Simmons.
It's okay, thank you. As a co-petitioner here and someone who worked to see this come to fruition, I just wanted to thank you, George, and others for their leadership in this. I think it's a shining example of what can happen when we show some patience and moderation and innovation and collaboration with each other in order to get a job done, but also do it in a cost-effective way. So thank you, George, for your leadership, and I also urge support for this. I think the need is present, and I think the yield in quality of life is for our seniors is huge, and I support that.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. And yes, Mr. Kilgore.
Wally Kilgore, 220 Atlantic. I just wanted to add to George's comment that this is not just going to be used for the seniors, but will also be used for all rec activities, so, the youth services, things like that. So it goes beyond just the rec, or just the senior program. It goes to the entire rec.
That's good to know. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Ferraro.
Yes, and just to point out in the article, again, this is one of those projects where there won't be a tax impact because any balance beyond what the private donations are and the trade-in value will come from the unassigned fund balance. And I think when we talk about looking for innovative ways to carry out the functions of the town without having an excessive burden on taxes, this is a perfect example of a public and private partnership where almost half of the value projected could come from private donations. And I think that's a great example of things to look forward to.
Thank you for that. Yes, Mrs. Soleil.
Deb Soleil, Atlantic Avenue. Just a quick question. If the value of the van we have now is only $8,000 and it's still good, is it worth trading it in? Or would it be a benefit to keep it for the town instead of a couple years from now looking to buy a different vehicle? Okay. And can we really fit all those people in one van? Yeah. If you're taking out a seat, it leaves us, 14, means she's 13 and a driver.
Mr. Ferraro.
Yes, thank you. Actually, this is an issue that came up. I went around trying to get signatures too, and a question that came up is, isn't this going to mean more expenses because we need insurance, we need maintenance, and we need fuel? And our response was, my response was, well, we're going to trade in the existing van, so that will be a trade-off. We won't have the expenses of the maintenance for an older vehicle, not a bad vehicle, but an older one, the insurance cost and all. So it was a trade-off to take those expenses and apply it to this so there wouldn't be an ongoing expense. And from what I understand from Mr. Chauncey's research on the van, it actually will accommodate, I think, more people than the current one, because the current one, first of all, people have a tough time getting in those back seats if you've ever been in one of those Econoline vans. And so more people may want to go, but it's more the expenses. We offset one with the other.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Mr. Solomon.
Thank you. I have two questions, Mr. Moderator. The first is, if the private donations come in and the warrant article does not specifically authorize the Select Board to accept those donations and apply them to this purchase, are we okay? Or should the motion or the article be amended? My second question is, I don't know if the current van requires a driver with a CDL license, and I don't know if this van, which is going to be bigger, would require that. So I'd like to find out if anyone in the rec department has a CDL license, and is that in fact going to be necessary? Thank you.
Okay. Do we know that? Mr. Chauncey, do we know that about the license?
The new van does not require a license. Our existing van does not require the special license. I checked this through the chauffeur limousine place up on Route 1 where they were kind enough to show us the transit vans that they have. And as far as the seating goes, we have, with our existing van, we have enough seating, I'm aware of, that for the amount of people that sign up to go to these trips. So this new one would be sufficient, as far as I'm aware of, from what I've been told.
Okay, Mr. Ferraro.
Yes, and to the first point you made about accepting the funds and having it go towards this, the board is already authorized to accept grants and donations because the amount, hopefully a lot, that would come from donations. They may have to have a public hearing during one of the regular sessions. And then, but it would come from a fund established, I guess, specifically for this. And I guess shame on the board if they didn't apply it to this. So they can accept it, and they can apply it to this.
We can't apply it any other way, can we?
Mr. Moderator,
All right.
I certainly commend Mr. Chauncey et al. And everyone for the work that they've done on this and support the proposition, but we don't have a fund specific to this purpose that we can deposit the money. So I look to the chief and maybe to Ryan to where the money can go.
Okay, Mr. Tully.
Because if it falls into the general fund, it falls.
When I spoke to Mr. Cornwell, we would make an availability to accept that money, and then it would get put towards. And Mr. Farrar is correct, we would have to have a public hearing on the funds because of the amount, and that would happen at a regular select board meeting.
But it could be done?
Yes.
All right. Any other questions or concerns about?
Call the vote? Oh, we don't need a vote.
Pardon me?
No, never mind.
All right, yeah, we're about to do that, yes.
Get done. Oh.
I probably know more than I should about all this. First of all, this was in the CIP, and so I am curious why it is not a simple town warrant article. Now, it was discussed at CIP, and Mr. Ferraro was in the audience for that meeting. I had taken some photos of the van and how impossible it would be for an older person with maybe a new hip or new knee to try to use it. So I just don't know why it is what it is now. I know Mrs. Kilgore made an effort with Rye, and then George has somehow got involved, but why it's not a simple town warrant article. Get this over with. It's been 3 years. We've been trying to get the van. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, may I respond to that?
Sure.
Do you want me to wait? I saw your note.
No, yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
In regards to Ms. Swank's inquiry, the citizens petition came in before the select board sat and identified possible warrant articles. I want to say it was October that the citizens petition came in. All right. I stand corrected. The discussion with the town administration started in October, and the signed citizens petition came in early December. So at that point, when the citizens petition came in and all voters that had signed it were vetted and it met the requirements needed to go on the ballot, the board discussed the fact that we didn't want to have competing articles on the ballot. I think we also acknowledged that there was a value to the fact that the citizens petition is a combination between private and public money going to the good of the community.
Okay. So are we satisfied with the discussion so far? Are we ready to conclude this article? Heads nodding yes. I don't know whether that's from fatigue or hunger or agreement. So Article 25 then will appear on the official ballot as it was petitioned and appeared on the warrant. Is there a motion?
I'll make a move. We restrict further consideration of this article.
Second. Okay, and it's been moved and seconded. Mr. Ferraro seconded it. Okay. All those in favor of restricting Article 25? Down hands. Those opposed? All right, Article 25 is restricted. Remember, we agreed to postpone consideration of the zoning articles 2 through 6 after 25. But before you scamper out of here, Mr. Harned's going to present those articles, but we would like to introduce, while everybody's still here, the new town administrator. Who's going to do that?
Go. I'll go for it. I'll stand up. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So as most people, everybody knows, Chief Tully has stood as our interim town administrator for quite a while after Paul Apple left, and has done 4 months.
4 months.
It's amazing the job that Chief Tully has done. He has been helped by an amazing staff that we have upstairs and a staff around him to make this transition at a critical time, the most critical time in the town, just seamless. So again, thank you, Chief, and thank you to all who assist in making this town run efficiently. And now we turn that efficiency over to Mr. Brian Kenrath, who I hope I pronounced his last name correctly for as many times as I've said it. He is the town manager currently, well, I guess currently still, in Gouldsboro, Maine. After an interview process that consisted of course, receiving all the resumes, then having a sort and stack of resumes, the candidates then went to a review process of department heads, where they got to meet all of the candidates and they got to give their impressions to the board. The top candidates then gave a presentation to the board. The presentation was a passion. Tell us something that you're passionate about. It could have been donuts, whatever it was. And the board then, the select board then also heard that with one resident from the community who sat. And then we again rated our candidates. And the candidate who we have chosen, it was a very difficult choice because we had an excellent group, is Brian, who will start with us on March 12th, I believe, the day before Election Day. So you'll get to meet him on Election Day. I believe he'll be here, and then take the reins after the transition process, which we'll talk about with the chief. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Brian if he might come up here so that you get to say hi to him.
Yeah, I bet. Well,
wait to be fired.
Hello, Northampton. As Jim pointed out, I do currently serve as the town manager in Gouldsboro, Maine. Previous to that, I served for 4 terms in the Maine House of Representatives. I was elected there my senior year of college. Let me just say first that I'm thrilled and very excited to be here today. I'm really looking forward to March 12th and getting to work. I think there's a lot to do here. I've gotten to know these guys a bit over the course of the interview process. I think we have a great team here together, and we are a team. And I think we're going to get some good results and have some fantastic success for the town of Northampton in the times to come. So there are about 4,500 of you, people of Northampton. I hope to get to know as many of you as possible, as soon as possible. Please always feel free to stop by the office, email me, call me. I love to interact with the public. I love public input. We are all here to serve you and your interests in this town. And so I'm here to listen, I'm here to learn, and here to get results. And I think it's in that order. So I hope you'll come and say hello sometime over the next few months. I really look forward to getting to know all of you, working with the Budget Committee, all of the other town committees. I think this is going to be great for all of us. So let me just say finally that I'm honored to have the confidence of this board to have chosen me for this position. I know you probably got a number of applicants, so again, I'm honored, humbled, and excited to be standing here today. And I look forward to getting to know and working with all of you in the times to come. So thank you very much. Come say hello. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So Mr. Harnett has agreed to go through the zoning articles, and he's not going to spend a lot of time on this because I understand he has a flight to Minneapolis at 2 o'clock.
Well, that might be a bit of a stretch, but I did look at the webcam at Wildcat a few minutes ago, and no, I'm motivated to spend the rest of the afternoon here, so.
So, Mr. Harnett, before you start, the full language of each of these changes is available where?
Town office, town admin, Rick Milner, zoning, and, zoning and planning administrator.
Is there a website where somebody can read these?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Good.
As we've been working with them, I haven't had to go to the website and look for them, but Larry
Okay.
has indicated they are available there.
So he'll pause in between each one for questions, but we'll just discuss them. We can't amend these, that's why we're doing them now.
Okay. Before I get started on a specific one, I just want to kind of give a general overview that sometimes the planning board comes forward with basically what are new ordinances in the town's ordinances, or very dramatic and significant changes that make major changes. This is not one of those years. This year we're coming forward with 5 different items, and they're basically just relatively minor tweaks and changes that we have become aware of through either our work on them and where we've run into a particular case that has shown an inconsistency or a little bit of vagueness in the ordinance, or state RSAs have changed and the town ordinances are no longer consistent with the state ordinances, and we make some changes to bring both the state and the town together on those ordinances. So jumping into the first one, Article 2, I assume everyone in this room can read and see what's written up there. The main emphasis of number 2 is that we have two main reasons to have fairly high towers in this town. One is for possible cellular service and cellular antennas, and the other one is for wind generation. And basically, we have ordinances already that cover the 2 of those, and all we're really doing here is putting financial security in place at the time those go up to ensure when they're no longer being used or they're abandoned or whatever, the financial wherewithal is there to remove these towers, and they just don't get abandoned and left there. And that's really the emphasis of this.
Okay. Questions on Article 2? Okay, Article 3.
Okay, moving on to Article 3, it's basically temporary structures. And again, we have an ordinance in place to deal with temporary structures. But again, over the course of time, we found a number of situations and a number of cases where we needed some clarification, or in a number of cases, there are other town ordinances that have been added, and we wanted to make sure that the temporary structure ordinance was consistent with those other ones. And some examples of that are, the town ordinances on signage and the town ordinances on lighting requirements and things like that. We wanted to make sure that the temporary structure ordinance reflected that any lighting or signage that was used with the temporary structures had to be consistent with the town ordinances on those issues, and they didn't fall into a special category. Some discussion, and I think the other main thing to bring out is that if somebody wants to do a temporary structure and what they want to do is not consistent with the ordinance, we are establishing a process where they can come and get a conditional use permit to be allowed to go ahead and do what they want to do when it might be prohibited by a general reading of the ordinance, but in their particular case, it's okay to go ahead and do that.
Give us an example of a temporary structure.
People that want to put up large tents, sales, if someone in the IVR is having a special sale or something like that, and they want to put up large tents and that kind of thing, do some special advertising. It's basically, if you go back and read the definition of temporary structure, it's any structure not on a permanent foundation or permanently attached to a fixed location in any manner. Said structure to be used for a specified period of time. A ground-mounted tent for personal use no greater than 150 square feet in size shall not be considered a temporary structure. That's the definition. So basically, it's not going on a foundation.
All right.
Being permanent.
Got it. Any questions about Article 3? Okay?
Okay.
Article 4.
Article 4, this is a very simple change. It is relevant to Section 409, the Wetlands Conservation District. We have a whole set of ordinances on the Wetlands Conservation District, but again, it is to handle, this is a simple, relatively short addition, which if somebody has a piece of property, they want to do something, come into us with a site plan, and they basically, there's something in what they want to do that is not consistent with the Wetland Conservation District ordinances, instead of having to go through the whole process of going to the ZBA and getting a variance on it, they can simply get a conditional use permit from the planning board, which is just something that they can do on the spot at that time when they're before the board for the rest of the business. So it just basically provides a mechanism where if they want to do something that is not consistent with the ordinance, if it makes sense and is applicable to that case, the planning board can give them the authority to go ahead and do that.
Okay, questions? Yes, Mr. Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Whoops. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just have a question that has been in my mind for several years now. It's my understanding that the authority for a planning board to issue conditional use permits has to be in the context of an innovative zoning ordinance. So I'm wondering on this Article 4 and Article 3 before it, what the statutory foundation for this authority might be and whether or not council has been asked to review it.
Okay, Mr. Arnett, can you answer, or would you care to answer that?
Yes, we are aware of that, and in terms of what we've done, we believe it fits within the statutory authority to go ahead and do it. Normally, traditionally, we have all of these ordinances run by council, and I assume that's been done, but I can't specifically answer that question. I will look into it. I mean, we do it every year, and I assume it's been done, but I can verify that.
Okay. Next one.
Okay, the next one is Section 510, which is basically the dumping and disposal of garbage. This one is a particular case where Northampton was very out of sync and out of conformity to the state RSAs in the sense that we were a holdover from days. It hasn't been an issue lately. It hasn't really come up. But in terms of reviewing the ordinance, it was something that we noticed because the town ordinance basically allowed for dumping or disposal of garbage, refuse, glass, just by burying it. And obviously, you can't do that anymore. The RSA is strictly prohibited. So the bottom line is all of that language has been struck, and it just basically says that our ordinance will be in accordance with the provisions of the state of New Hampshire RSAs relative to solid waste disposal.
Okay. All right. Article 6.
And last but not least, this is a modification to the accessory dwelling units. And this was strictly, that came out of a case we had this year where applicant came before the board and they wanted to put an in-law apartment as an accessory dwelling unit on their property. They went before the ZBA because they wanted relief from the setback. They got relief from the ZBA. It was entirely reasonable. They got relief from the ZBA for that variance. But when they came to us, the way the wording had been done, You could make the argument, if you wanted, that the conditional use, the variance that the ZBA had given for the property applied to the house and not necessarily the accessory dwelling unit. It wasn't completely clear, so the bottom line is we've simply changed the language that says the accessory dwelling unit just has to conform to whatever the original house had to perform. So therefore, that variance that had been given relative to the house would apply to the accessory dwelling unit. So just clarifying a case.
Thank you. Questions on Article 6? Thank you,
That's all
Mr.
she wrote.
Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the waiting till the end. Hope you get on that plane. Article 26, any other business, to see if the town will transact any other business that may legally come before the meeting. Does anybody have anything legally come before the meeting?
I'm actually going to be closing the Budget Committee meeting at this point, so
All right.
we are now closing the meeting for our group.
Okay. You're keeping yours open?
Yes, because I have to ask them a question. Yes.
All right. Second session. You are also notified to meet for the second session of the annual town meeting to elect town officers by official ballot and to vote by official ballot on the warrant articles as they may have been amended at the first session, to be held at the Northampton School, 201 Atlantic Avenue, Northampton, New Hampshire, on Tuesday, March 13th, 2018. Polls open at 8 a.m. and close no earlier than 7 p.m. We're adjourned.
Great job.
He adjourned. So the only question I have is, we amended 16, 17, and 23 to take out the language. So, I mean, legally, we have to consider whether or not we want to revote. We're not obligated to revote. So as long as our votes are our votes will stay the same. So do you guys want to revote those or not?